I had just settled into the night shift when the call came in. A lone car, headlights cutting thin lines through the storm, stranded somewhere along Highway 9. No other cars in sight. No radio chatter from nearby units. Just a report that didn't make sense until I was there. By the time I reached the mile marker, the rain had thickened, slamming against my windshield like fists. It wasn't normal. Not the way it fell or the way it landed. Each drop seemed to linger, clinging to the surface of the road before splitting into impossible shapes. I squinted through the blur, the streetlight smeared into long, dripping streaks. My fingers tightened on the wheel, knuckles white beneath the leather. I parked behind the car, engine idling, headlights cutting across the hood. The vehicle was old, dented along the driver's side, paint chipped, but no signs of life inside. No one moving, no glow from the dashboard. Nothing. The rain pelted so hard that it drowned out the world. My own breathing sounded strange, almost magnified. I reached for my flashlight, the beam slicing through the dark like a knife. Stepping out, I felt it immediately. The air was thick, almost alive, pressing against my skin like water. Every droplet that hit me wasn't just wet. It burned with a strange heat. The storm moved with purpose. It shifted when I shifted. It seemed to know I was there. I shook my head, forcing the thought away. It was just rain, just a storm. I was imagining it. The car's windows were fogged over. I tapped gently on the driver's side. No response. Nothing inside moved. And yet, the hair on the back of my neck rose when I noticed the door handle. It twitched, just slightly, but deliberately, like someone or something had brushed against it moments before I touched it. I froze, staring, waiting for a movement that never came. I circled the vehicle slowly, flashlight swinging. Every step I took felt delayed, as if the ground itself resisted me. The puddles around my boots rippled outward in patterns that didn't match the falling rain. Shapes formed and faded. Faces, sometimes staring up at me from the black water. My stomach twisted. I told myself it was just reflections, my mind playing tricks. That had to be it. When I got to the rear of the car, I noticed something I didn't expect. The trunk was slightly ajar. Not a crack, not a dented latch. It was like someone had left it open on purpose, expecting me to notice. I shined the flashlight inside. Nothing. Empty. But the air smelled different. Rust and wet asphalt, yes, but underneath it, something colder. Metallic, sharp like blood. I gagged slightly, stepping back. Then I heard it. A faint sound at first. Something soft, almost tentative, like someone whispering just behind my ear. I whipped around, flashlight cutting the darkness in wild arcs. Nothing. Only the rain. Only the highway stretching into a black blur. I told myself I was overreacting. The storm, the isolation, hours of nothing on a night shift can make you hear things. But the whispering came again, clearer this time. Words I couldn't understand, half-formed syllables carried on the wind, riding on the water that pooled along the asphalt. The rain intensified as if responding, beating harder against my coat, my face. I needed a rational plan. I radioed in, Unit 14, I'm at the scene. No one in the car, requesting backup, but road conditions are... My voice cracked as the radio emitted static, a low humming beneath my words. Then something interrupted. A voice, not through the radio, not human. It echoed from all around me, soft but firm. You shouldn't be here. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned slowly, scanning the highway, the tree line, the downpour. Nothing. No figures. No headlights. Just a relentless storm and a lonely car. I approached the driver's side again. The handle no longer twitched. Now it was completely still. I tested it. Locked. Solid. Nothing inside. I exhaled shakily, telling myself to calm down, to stop imagining things. But the wet air felt thicker now, heavier, like a blanket pressing against my chest. Breathing became a conscious effort. From the corner of my eye, movement. A shadow flitted across the road, just beyond the edge of my flashlight. I spun. Empty. Only the rain, only the dark. Then a sound. Metal scraping on metal, faint, distant, yet terrifyingly close. My mind raced. No one else should be out here. Highway 9 was desolate at night. Completely. Yet something was moving just beyond the puddles, just beyond the reach of my light. I stepped backward, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. My boots squished in water. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the wet asphalt. In that flash, I thought I saw them. Not a person, not human, just a figure standing a few feet away, tall, motionless, blurred by rain. When the light faded, it was gone. My stomach turned. I blinked. Lightning again. Gone. I couldn't explain it. I radioed in again. Dispatch. Static swallowed my words. Then, leave. Now. Not through the radio. Through the air. Through the storm. Through my own ears. My knees buckled slightly. I had never felt fear like this before. Pure cold creeping into my bones. I backed toward my car, flashlight shaking in my hands. Rain pelted so hard now it felt like punches, each drop burning with a strange intensity. My pulse was deafening. I reached the driver's door, fumbling for keys. Every second stretched, each movement slow, heavy, impossible. The shadow from before appeared again, closer this time. No form, just darkness, solid and intent. I hit the key fob. The alarm sounded. The headlights flaring. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It waited, and then the rain changed. No longer falling. It seemed to rise around me, curling upward in slow spirals, filling the air with chill that sank into my bones. I slammed the door, locked it, and sat trembling behind the wheel. The storm raged, but something had changed. The rain wasn't just hitting the ground. It was surrounding me, moving with a purpose. Every puddle reflected a world that wasn't mine. Shapes forming, twisting, writhing, whispering in tongues I could not understand. I gripped the steering wheel, eyes darting. The lone car ahead remained motionless, empty, yet I knew it wasn't truly empty. Minutes passed, or hours, I couldn't tell. Time didn't exist here. Then I saw it, reflected in the rear-view mirror, a face. Pale, indistinct, watching. Not human. Watching me from the back seat. I spun around. Nothing. The rain clattered against the roof. My chest tightened. I whispered to myself, I need to get out. I need to leave. But the road stretched endlessly, straight into black. Headlights of my cruiser illuminated nothing but rain and asphalt. The figure didn't move, yet I could feel it, its presence pressing against the windows, against my skin. I tried the engine. It roared. I put it in gear. The tires spun on wet asphalt, the storm seeming to resist my escape. And then, silence. Not quiet. Something deeper. The storm had stopped responding, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. I radioed once more. Silence. Only static. Only faint whispers, now laced with urgency. You're part of it now. You can't leave. I realized then that Highway 9 wasn't just empty. It was alive. It was waiting. And somehow it knew me. I didn't drive far. I didn't even try to. I just sat, rain dripping from the roof onto my shoulders, heart hammering, waiting, knowing that nothing I understood mattered here anymore. And somewhere, just at the edge of my vision, the shadow moved again. I hadn't slept since the call on Highway 9. Hours, or maybe it was minutes. Slipped past in a blur of rain and darkness. My cruiser idled near the abandoned stretch, wipers slapping against the glass like they were trying to push the world away. I kept staring down the road, waiting, because I knew I wasn't alone. I just didn't know what was watching me. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the lightning, a reflection in the wet asphalt. But no, a figure, standing perfectly still, shoulder width in the roadside ditch. No motion, no sway, not even the wind that tore at the raincoat it seemed to wear. The storm, always a storm, stopped around it, like the air itself refused to touch it. I could see the rain curling in sharp arcs, skimming past the figure and falling somewhere beyond. My pulse spiked. I want to call it in, to tell dispatch that someone was out there, but my throat felt sealed, tight, and wrong. Something about the way it waited. It wasn't human, not entirely, not in any way I recognized. I reached for my flashlight, sweeping it across the ditch. beam cut through the sheets of rain, scattering water into sparkling arcs, and still it stood. Black, just black. No features, just a shape, solid, immovable, yet somehow pressing forward at me with intent. I felt in my chest a slow, curling pressure that wrapped around my ribs like icy fingers. I took a step forward, wincing as the gravel crunched under my boots. The storm shifted. Rain began to sweep horizontally, forming walls of water that didn't obey the wind. Each step I took caused the storm to bend, to swirl around me in impossible patterns. The world itself seemed aware of me. I told myself I was imagining it. Rational thought was slipping through my fingers like wet sand. I spoke, voice shaking. "Hey, you okay? Do you need help?" No response. Just the sound of rain hitting asphalt in the low, constant hum in my ears. Lightning flashed, and I caught a glimpse of it. The figure didn't move, but the space around it seemed to pulse. Shadows stretched outward, and then snapped back like a living thing, breathing. My stomach churned. I realized I wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. The blacktop felt soft, liquid almost, moving subtly under my boots. I staggered slightly, trying to regain balance, eyes locked on that shape. Another flash, closer this time, and then I noticed impossible detail. The puddles at its feet, each drop of water, each reflection, reflected something that wasn't real. Faces, hands, the curl of lips that weren't smiling. I blinked, trying to force my mind to obey, but the images remained etched in the water like some cruel mirror. I swallowed, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. The figure shifted slightly, not moving its legs, not bending its arms, just existing differently. The rain around it responded, slanting toward its shape, curling upward like smoke. A breeze came from nowhere, cold and sharp, twisting around me in spirals, pulling my hair against my neck, my heart hammering so loud I could feel it in my ears. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and slam the cruiser into gear and leave, but the road stretched endlessly. Highways aren't supposed to feel like corridors in a maze, but this one did. The storm was bending the world into its will. The figure was patient, like it had all the time in the world. Waiting, watching. I stepped backward, flashlight swinging wildly. I caught another glimpse of it in the periphery, a subtle shimmer along the outline. It wasn't static black anymore. It flickered, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer, except it was freezing, bone-deep cold. The shadows surrounding it curled outward, reaching toward me, almost touching my arms, but dissipating before contact. My chest tightened, a hot panic rising in my throat. Then the whispers started, soft, indistinct at first, almost drowned by the rain, but undeniably there. My mind tried to make them words. "Leave, leave, leave," repeated in a chorus that didn't seem human. I spun in a circle, flashlight slicing the storm, but the voice came from everywhere. It came from the asphalt, from the trees, from the air curling around me. I stumbled, feeling the slick ground give way beneath my boots. The world tilted, then straightened again. The figure remained unwavering, its presence undeniable. I couldn't tear my eyes away. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. The road behind it, the blacktop, was dry. No rain touched it. The line of asphalt itself seemed to bend, retreating from the figure as if giving it space, forming a boundary I couldn't cross. I wanted to speak, but my voice refused me. So I just moved, small steps backward, flashlight trembling, scanning the ditch. My mind raced. I had been a sheriff for years. I had seen accidents, murders, storms, drownings. I had seen things that made grown men scream. And yet, nothing had prepared me for this. Another step, and the figure responded. Not by moving, but the storm changed. Sheets of rain lashed diagonally now, carving a path between me and it. Thunder rolled low, unnatural, hollow. I realized the noise wasn't outside. It was inside me, my chest, my skull, resonating with that low, impossible vibration. I turned toward the cruiser. Headlights still cut swaths into the black, rain pattering violently on the hood. My keys were in my hand, but something told me leaving wasn't as simple as starting. The car, the road beyond the figure. beyond the bend of impossible asphalt, stretched into darkness that wasn't just night, but absence, and I couldn't step into it. The whispers grew louder. I could almost make out fragments now. You belong, you belong. I shook my head violently, tried to break the sound, but it was stuck in my ears. The figure tilted its head slightly, a gesture I knew I shouldn't interpret, yet couldn't help but see as deliberate. Observation, judgment, awareness. Then came the movement, not from the figure. It remained rigid, but the shadows around it, they extended, twisting, reaching, slithering toward me like ink poured across wet paper. My flashlight flickered. I slapped it against my palm, the beam cutting again, and in that fleeting circle of light, I saw a detail that froze my blood. A hand. Long, impossibly thin, fingertip touching the asphalt, not reaching, not attacking, just resting, waiting, and the rain curved around it. I realized then this wasn't a person. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't a trick of my mind. It was something else, something aware, something that could bend reality itself. And I had walked straight into its waiting. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into a ditch, heart hammering. My flashlight beam hit the figure again. It remained motionless, but now I noticed a subtle shifting of shadows, patterns forming the rain, almost like writing I couldn't read. I wanted to leave, to run, to scream, but the world wouldn't let me. Minutes, hours passed. I don't know. Time warped here. Every flash of lightning revealed the same scene. The figure standing, the impossible weather swirling around it, the whispers crawling in my ears. I gripped the flashlight, knuckles white, knowing the only thing I could do was wait. Wait and hope the storm didn't claim me. And then, as if sensing my fear, the figure stepped forward. Not fully, not like a human stride, but a shift. The air pulsed, rain changing direction in unnatural arcs. And I understood it had been waiting for me all along. Not to attack, not to speak, just to be seen. I leaned against the cruiser, sweat mixing with the rain on my face. The storm bent around me, the whispers filling my head, the shadow on the shoulder waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't. And I knew then that leaving wasn't just impossible. It wasn't allowed. The storm had faded, but the weight didn't lift. Rain no longer hammered against my cruiser, but the air was thick, heavy, like the night itself was holding its breath. I stayed by the roadside, trying to shake the memory of the figure. Its impossibly still form, the way the shadows twisted around it like living ink. My hands were shaking, wet from sweat and the lingering drizzle, and I kept telling myself I'd seen something, nothing, everything. My mind flickering between explanation and disbelief, and then the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it. Channel set on the usual patrol frequency, but now there was static, a low hiss that burrowed into my ears, filling the cabin. I rubbed the knobs, twisted the dials, but the sound persisted, insistent. Then a voice, soft, broken, impossibly faint, whispering my name. Sure, IFF don't look. I froze. My pulse shot through my chest like a jackhammer. I looked around, half expecting the figure from the ditch to be back, waiting in some impossible shadow. But the road was empty, just dark, endless asphalt, lined by the whispering trees. The voice came again, clearer this time, though still drowned in static. They are behind you. I jerked, spinning in my seat. No one, nothing, just a night, and the rain that had softened to a drizzle, dripping quietly from branches onto slick asphalt. My radio hissed, the static growing louder, filling the cruiser with a sound that wasn't entirely mechanical. It was almost alive. I grabbed the mic. Dispatch. Any units out here? My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, tight and brittle. Silence. Only the hiss and the whispers. Then came another voice, different but equally soft, crawling through the static like smoke through a crack in the wall. Don't stop driving. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. What? Who's there? My own words sounded foolish, desperate. The voices didn't respond, not exactly. They simply continued, layered over each other now. Hundreds of tiny, indecipherable murmurs. Some words broke through. Names, places, details I hadn't known. they're not what they seem. I swallowed hard. My mind searched for rationality. Radio interference. Someone playing a prank. Sleep deprivation. But I knew better. I had been a sheriff long enough to recognize the feel of fear that isn't imagination. This was something different. Something patient, watching, aware. Static crackled again. The whispering intensified. And now I realized it wasn't coming from outside. Not really. It was inside me. Beneath my skull, behind my eyes. The cabin of the cruiser didn't contain it. The air didn't carry it. But my mind could hear it, could feel it. Don't move, they see. I hunched over the wheel, pressing my forehead to it, trying to block it out. The world had narrowed to the sound of my heartbeat and the voices creeping in and out of consciousness. I thought about leaving, about calling it in, about driving away from this stretch of road forever. But instinct warned me. The road had changed. It felt wrong, curved in ways that didn't make sense, edges fading into black like the night had swallowed the pavement whole. Another crackle, another whisper. This one was insistent, urgent, stop or they follow. And in that instant, I felt it, a pressure in the back of my mind, like icy hands pressing against my skull. Images flashed behind my eyes, someone or something crouched in the shadows, watching, waiting. The rain hadn't returned, but the wet smell lingered, tangling with the metallic scent of fear. I reached for the scanner on the dash, twisting the knobs, channel after channel, trying to find human frequency, something logical. But every dial, every frequency, returned the same static-laced whisper. One voice would start describing something happening. Then as I listened, I realized it was describing events that hadn't happened yet. They take her in the yard. I blinked. My heart skipped. What were you talking about? I muttered, shaking. The words were fragments, fleeting, broken, but they painted pictures in my mind. A yard, a girl, someone dragged into the shadows, screaming. I had no idea who, no idea where, but my gut screamed that this was real, that the voice knew, that the night was showing me something that hadn't yet come to pass. Another whisper. Behind you, they never sleep. I spun around again. The ditch where I had first seen the figure was empty. No footprints. No sign of life. Just dark, endless road. Trees bending in a silent wind. But I felt it, like a pressure on my shoulder. A touch I couldn't see. Cold and firm. Impossible yet undeniable. The radio screamed then. Static rising into a piercing, almost unbearable shriek. Voices layered, overlapping, multiple tones, multiple speakers, some human, some not. Names of missing people I had never known. Addresses I'd never seen. Dates that made no sense. And each detail seemed urgent, as if they were warning me, guiding me, tethering me to events I hadn't yet lived through. I backed the cruiser slowly, trying to gain distance. The road curved unnaturally, twisting around me. Every shadow in the periphery seemed to lean closer, stretching toward the car. I realized with a cold certainty that the radio wasn't giving me information. It was tethering me, anchoring me here, forcing me to hear. Look out, don't look away. I covered my ears, but the sound persisted, inside, around, everywhere. Static burned behind my eyes. My vision blurred. I felt nausea curl up from my stomach to my throat. My hands trembled, gripping the wheel so tightly it felt like I might crush it. Then a sudden calm. The whispers paused. The static softened. And I realized something had moved. Outside, in the night, just beyond the headlights. A shadow, elongated, impossible, crouched just at the edge of visibility, waiting, watching. A figure, or many, I couldn't tell. And yet, I knew. They were connected to the voices, to the warnings, to the cold, deliberate pressure that had been pressing on my mind. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe properly. I realized that listening, truly listening, was a trap. The more I heard, the more I understood, and understanding was terrifying. Names, faces, dates, places, things I shouldn't know, things that hadn't happened yet. And somewhere in the static, I realized my own name, whispered with care, repeated over and over. You are next. Panic surged. I hit the ignition, ready to drive, to flee, to escape this nightmare. But the road resisted. Asphalt rippled like water beneath my tires, curving impossibly, bending around me. My headlights hit nothing but black, and I understood with a clarity that made my blood run cold. The voices were everywhere, and the night had no end. Static whispered, coaxed, warned. My own thoughts seemed borrowed, echoed, repeated in strange patterns. I had seen impossible things tonight. The shadow, the storm, the road bending. But this was different. This was a mind trying to reach into mine, trying to tether me to a future I didn't want to see. I grabbed the radio one last time, twisting knobs, flipping switches, praying for silence, clarity, reason. And then I heard it, clear, direct, not a fragment this time, not broken, not distant. You can't leave. And I knew I couldn't. The road, the storm, the shadow, they were all part of it, part of something that watched, waited, and whispered. Every name, every warning of things to come. They were proof, and I was trapped in their static, a listener, a witness, bound to hear the next truth, the next horror. I sank into the seat, heart hammering, hands shaking on the wheel. Rain had stopped completely now. Night stretched endlessly, quiet but alive. And through the radio, softly, faintly, the whispers continued, promising knowledge, warning of fate, confirming that nothing I had known about reality applied here. The night had begun to speak, and I had no choice but to listen. I finally got out of the cruiser, shaking, trying to convince myself the voices on the radio had been some interference, a trick of the storm. The road was slick with rain, faintly glowing under my headlights, reflecting the trees like a mirror of twisted black fingers. My boots slipped in the mud as I approached the lone car. Headlights off, engine cold. Alone, or at least it should have been. I circled it slowly, my flashlight slicing through the dark. The windshield was smeared with rain, fog from inside as if someone had been sitting there, breathing. I leaned close, wiping the glass with a sleeve. Empty, seats vacant, air still, nothing. But then I noticed it, a cup in the cup holder, warm, steam curling faintly into the night. My stomach sank. No one could have been here. I had seen the car sitting there when I arrived, deserted, motionless. No footprints in the mud, no lights, no movement. And yet, the cup was warm, still smelling faintly of coffee or something bitter, almost metallic. I stepped back, my heart hammered, adrenaline making me shake so violently I had to grip the flashlight with both hands. The passenger seat, there were slight impressions, subtle dips in the leather, as if someone had leaned back, settled in, but the car hadn't moved. Not a single sound of the engine, no heater running, nothing. And yet, someone had been here. I opened the driver's door slowly, trying to rationalize, telling myself it was heat retained from the sun or the engine. But the night was cold, dripping with rain, and the car had been off for hours. Every instinct screamed at me that I wasn't alone. I reached inside and touched the cup. It was warmer than it should be. My fingers burned slightly, the heat unnaturally intense for a cup that hadn't been filled minutes ago. And then I noticed the small handprints on the passenger window. Too small, too delicate to belong to anyone my eyes had ever seen. I froze. My mind raced, trying to explain it. A child? Someone hiding in the back? But the doors had been locked, and the car had been sitting alone on the roadside. I stepped back again, flashlight trembling, and that's when I heard it. A soft breath. Not from outside, not from the trees, not from the wind. Right there, behind me, I spun, flashlight cutting through shadows. Nothing. The road stretched empty in both directions. No figure, no sound, just the quiet after the storm. Wet leaves dripping from branches, but the sense of being watched pressed down on me. I felt it in my chest and my skull, like invisible eyes boring into me, patient and cold. I returned to the car, compelled, drawn toward it. The handprint on the glass seemed to shift subtly when I wasn't looking directly. A slight smudge here, a faint curve there, as if someone or something was adjusting its position without moving in the physical sense. I opened the passenger door. The seat was empty, but the warmth lingered. Then I noticed a folded piece of paper on the floor. My flashlight beam landed on it, and I hesitated, fingers shaking. I had been out here long enough to know fear could make anything seem real, but the paper bore my name, handwritten, my handwriting. I picked it up, staring at it in disbelief. I hadn't written this. Not today. Not ever. And yet there was, inked on cheap line paper, neat, deliberate. I unfolded it carefully. Words scrawled across it, warnings, observations, details I hadn't spoken aloud. My own thoughts mirrored on paper I had never touched. Do not leave. Watch the road. They follow. My hands trembled violently. I dropped the paper, and it fluttered to the wet floor mat, sticking slightly to the carpet. I leaned in close to the passenger seat again. That's when I felt it. The faintest pressure against my shoulder. Light. Almost nothing. But enough to make me snap upright. No one. I jumped back, flashlight shaking, hard in my throat. The car seemed to breathe. The seats expanded slightly, dips in the leather adjusting as if inhaling, exhaling. A faint warmth swirled in the cabin, making the car feel alive, sentient. The cup rattled slightly in the holder, as though nudged by a hand that shouldn't exist. I realized then that I wasn't meant to see it fully. Not yet. Whatever presence had been in that car was patient, waiting, testing, observing. And it wasn't human. I thought about calling dispatch. My radio lay useless in the cruiser, voices still whispering warnings, overlapping fragments of events yet to come. I didn't want backup. I didn't want anyone else to experience it. I was alone and the car knew it. I sat on the edge of the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, trying to collect myself. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the road was different now. Shapes shifted at the corners of my eyes, the dark bending around me, the wet asphalt stretching impossibly. The car felt small, confining, and yet, as I sat there, I could feel it moving slightly under me, like it was alive. Tiny movements, subtle vibrations through the frame, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to the touch. I thought about the figure I had seen in the ditch. Could it have been this? A manifestation tied to the car itself? The voices on the radio? The warmth in the cup? My brain, desperate to cling to reason, refused to accept the impossible. And yet, everything pointed to it. Everything screamed that reality had been tonight. And I was caught in the fold. The paper moved then, sliding slightly across the floor as if nudged. The words changed. My eyes darted, convinced I was hallucinating, but the letters were formed, new warnings, new messages. I hadn't written them. I hadn't seen them before. My mind tried to rationalize, tried to insist this was stress, dehydration, the aftermath of the storm. But deep down I knew it wasn't. A whisper, soft, impossibly close. My name. I spun around. Empty road. Empty trees. The dark stretched into infinity. But the feeling of presence thick and coiled, pressing against me. I could feel on the seat beside me, on the steering wheel, on the air itself. Watching. Waiting. Then, unmistakably, I saw it, or at least a suggestion of it. In the corner of my vision, a faint silhouette, shifting with the shadows, too quick to be human, too deliberate to be random. Every time I blinked, it disappeared. Every time I looked directly, the space beside me was empty, but the warmth, the breath, the weight on the seat, it remained. I leaned back, heart hammering, my hands pressing my face, try and shake the feeling, to rationalize. And then the whisper came again, clear, direct, from inside my own head, or maybe from the air itself. They exist because you see. I froze. The words burned into my skull. I could feel the car pulsing faintly beneath me, alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. The cup rattled again. The handprints shifted. The paper shifted. And I realized everything in this car was waiting for something. For me. For my recognition. And in that moment, it occurred to me the car wasn't empty. The passenger had never existed in a conventional sense. And yet, the traces, the warmth, the whispers, the movements, they were real. The impossible truth settled over me like ice. I was not alone, never had been, and the night wasn't done showing me. I leaned back into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, staring at the passenger side. The cup, the handprints, the paper, the warmth, all proof of a presence that shouldn't exist. My mind reeled, my body trembled, and the night whispered on, patient, eternal, waiting for me to see, to acknowledge, to understand that some passengers do not arrive in cars. Some passengers are born from the night itself, and they never leave. I didn't want to open my mouth, to speak, to call out. I simply sat there, breathing shallowly, listening to the silence that wasn't silent, aware that the car, the night, the impossible presence, it had claimed a part of me, and I didn't know if I could ever leave again. The storm was gone. The rain had ended, but the passenger remained, waiting, and I realized that I had seen the impossible and had no choice but to acknowledge it. I had been called to the outskirts of Redstone on a fog-heavy night, the kind where the mist seeps into your bones before you even leave the cruiser. Patrol reports had been sparse, routine checks, abandoned streets, but the dispatcher's tone had carried a faint edge, a hint of concern I wasn't used to hearing. I shrugged it off at first. Fog makes people nervous. Fog makes cops nervous, too. The town looked dead, or at least it should have. Windows dark, streets empty, but the fog, God, the fog, was alive in a way I hadn't felt before. It rolled in thick blankets, curling around street lamps, swallowing the sidewalks, slipping under doors. Every step I took felt resisted, like I was pushing through something physical, even though I could see nothing. I parked near the old town hall, the cruiser's lights cutting a weak circle through the mist. The building was old, brick worn by time, doors locked but lights flickering inside like someone, or something, was moving. The town census forms have been filed here for decades, some as far back as the 1940s. My job tonight wasn't unusual. A routine check on paperwork, confirm residence. But something about Redstone's fog made routine feel like trespass. Inside, the office smelled faintly of mold and paper, dust motes floating in the beam of my flashlight, desks lined with ledgers and forms, everything neatly stacked. I pulled a stack of census forms from the oldest drawer first. Names, dates of birth, addresses, standard. But then I noticed a strange pattern. Some of the names were familiar to me, others impossible. People who shouldn't exist. Records of residents who had never been listed anywhere else. Photographs attached to some forms, faded, sepia tones. But the faces I had never seen, but my brain insisted it recognized. I frowned, shaking off the feeling. I picked up a form dated last week. I shouldn't have been able to see a record that new. I read the name aloud, quietly. Evelyn Caro. Nothing, just paper. But the fog outside shifted. I swear it thickened, pressing at the windows. My pulse spiked, the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight. I moved closer to the window. The street outside was empty, but the mist shifted as if something had stepped into it, just beyond visibility. I turned back to the desk. Another form, another impossible name, and then another. After a dozen or so, my unease became tangible, a slow burn crawling through my chest. Some forms had addresses that didn't exist, houses that were gone for decades, burned down, bulldozed, or never built. Yet someone or something was filing their existence into these ledgers. My fingers shook as I leafed through the pages, each name more implausible than the last. And then I noticed a pattern in the dates. Death certificates listed some of these residents as having died years ago, but their census forms have been updated last week. A census of the dead. A census of people who should not exist. I backed away from the desk, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The fog outside was rising, curling under the doorframe now, drifting over the floor like it had weight, like it was alive. I could almost feel it pressing against me, a cold, damp hand that didn't exist. I thought about calling it in, calling dispatch, asking for backup, but the fog muffled my radio signal. Static hissed and crackled, swallowing my words before they could reach anyone. My own voice sounded foreign, tinny, as if the room itself was swallowing sound. I turned back to the forms. One had my name, written neatly, typed even, in a ledger I had never touched. My heart stopped. I leaned closer. The form had my birthday, my address, my photograph. It was dated 2 days from now. 2 days from now, a whisper brushed my ear, soft, almost lost in the hum of the building, saying nothing I could recognize. I spun around. Empty office. Dust motes in the flashlight beam. But the fog had moved inside, curling along the floorboards, settling over the chairs, pooling at my feet. I stepped back instinctively, and that's when I saw it. A faint outline in the mist where no outline should have been. It was human-shaped, low, crouched almost, and I swear it was staring. Not at me, exactly, but at the ledger, at the forms I had just touched. I swallowed hard, the taste of iron on my tongue. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my body was rooted. The forms, the fog, the whispering. Something had taken hold. I could feel it, patient and waiting, almost like the town itself was breathing, observing. I picked up my flashlight again, sweeping across the room. The shadow dissolved the moment I tried to focus on it directly, but then tiny movements in the corner of my eye, folders shifting on their own, paper edges trembling as if brushed by fingers that weren't there. I bent to pick up a fallen ledger. My hand shook. When I opened it, the entries inside weren't what I remember from a few moments ago. New names had appeared, neatly typed, forming lines I hadn't read before. Some of them matched the forms on the desk. Others were blank, save for a small, neat symbol in the status column, something that didn't correspond to any notation I had ever seen. The fog outside thickened. I could hear it curling around the building, brushing the windows like it wanted in. My flashlight flickered, and then, unmistakably, a soft, deliberate tapping on the window behind me. Slow, measured, not the wind, not rain. Tap, tap, tap. I turned. Nothing. But my mind refused to let go of the notion that someone was there. Someone or something. And every instinct in my body whispered that the census wasn't about counting. It was about waiting, collecting, observing. I stepped toward the door, intent on leaving, but the fog at my feet moved first. Not like mist, but like a shallow wave, curling around my ankles, pulling at my boots. I yanked back. The forms on the desk seemed to twitch, pages fluttering as if in a breeze I couldn't feel. And then I saw it, one of the photographs. Eyes staring, not just printed eyes on paper, but eyes that seemed to glint, aware. The photograph pulsed faintly, a subtle warmth radiating from it. And for a heartbeat, I thought I saw it move, blink. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of files. They scattered across the floor. And as they did, names spilled in the pages into the air, whispered aloud by voices I could not place. Low, soft, overlapping. Names. My name among them. Names of the dead. Names of the impossible. Names of the missing. I swallowed hard. My flashlight shook, clattering against the desk. The fog rolled further into the office, pooling into corners, seeping under furniture, and I could feel it pressing, watching. The town outside was alive, breathing, waiting, and the census forms, they were part of it, part of something I couldn't understand. I ran my hands over the nearest stack of forms. All the names blurred together. Some I knew, some I did not. My hands moved without thought, shuffling the pages, desperate to find something solid, something familiar. But the forms kept changing, shifting, new names appearing in my handwriting, others in scripts I didn't recognize. The whispering grew, louder now all around me. You are counted. You are next. I spun, flashlight slicing the fog, but the office remained empty, except for forms, the desks, and the mist that moved like a living thing. I backed away toward the door, breath coming fast, chest tight. Every step felt resisted by the fog, as though the building itself was holding me inside. My hand trembled on the doorknob, and then I felt it, cold, a presence right behind me, watching, patient, waiting. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I knew it was there, just like the forms, just like the fog. And when I finally pushed the door open, the mist outside didn't just wait. It closed around me, rolling over the threshold, as if to say the town would not release me so easily. I stepped into the night, fog thick, wet, suffocating. And the census forms? They waited behind me, silent, patient, counting. And I realized with a chill that I was now part of the record, part of the list. The fog curled around my legs, whispering my name, and I had no idea how or if I would ever leave. The fog didn't let up. If anything, it had thickened. Clinging to my uniform, soaking through seams, sticking cold and heavy to my skin. Red stone streets stretched before me, quiet, empty, except for the faint glint of water on asphalt and the muted hum of my cruiser idling behind. My boots clicked against the pavement. Every sound amplified in the fog's strange silence. I had no real reason to walk the streets that night. My dispatcher had warned me it was routine. Check the census forms, make sure the town wasn't falling apart. But something about being on foot in this fog felt necessary. Like seeing was believing. And if I didn't look, I wouldn't understand. The houses here were older than I expected. Weathered wood, peeling paint, shutters barely hanging. Most windows were dark, but some glimmer with light that didn't belong to any lamp. My flashlight cut a circle in the gloom, illuminating cracked porches and warped doors. And then I noticed it, movement, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shadow shifting behind a curtain, a door hinge barely clicking. I froze. Every instinct told me that nothing should be alive in Redstone tonight. The town had been abandoned for decades, or so official records said, but the air felt thick with presence, and the subtle heat radiating from some doors was undeniable. Not warm from sunlight or electricity, but a living warmth, as if someone or something was breathing behind them. I took a careful step forward. My radio crackled softly, static hissing in the empty street. "Sheriff," I called softly, though I wasn't sure if I wanted an answer. The mist swallowed my voice immediately, and a chill rose along my spine. The first house I approached was small, almost fragile, but its door seemed aware. I stopped at the threshold, hand hovering over the doorknob. The heat was faint, like the faint pulse of a heartbeat, and I could feel the air inside shifting slightly, pressing outward. I leaned in, my ear against the wood, trying to hear anything, but the fog muted even sound. Then it moved. A hinge creaked, just a whisper, a subtle till of the door that hadn't been there before. I stepped back, flashlight trembling in my hand. The fog swirled around the house, curling at the base of the walls, creeping under the porch like fingers searching. I tried to rationalize it. Wind, old wood, my imagination. But then the second house did the same. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even aimed the flashlight properly. And yet the door seemed to inch toward me, a faint pressure, an invitation, or a warning. I could feel it watching. Every house I passed, the pattern repeated. The slight tilt of the door, the gentle sway of a curtain, the pulse of heat through weathered wood. I realized I wasn't walking through a town. I was walking through a labyrinth of awareness, a city where doors themselves noticed, judged, perhaps even remembered. I stopped in front of a large two-story house. Its door was cracked open just enough to let the fog press inside, a slow, deliberate intrusion. The heat was stronger here, nearly tangible, and the silence felt denser. My flashlight swept the interior quickly. Shadows leapt, but there was nothing. Yet I could feel eyes, countless unseen eyes, tracking me. I took a tentative step onto the porch. The boards groaned under my weight, but the movement didn't seem to matter to whatever waited inside. And then I felt it. Pressure, subtle but insistent, like someone brushing against my shoulder without touching. I spun. Empty air. Only fog curling between the street lamps and the house. I shook my head, trying to steady my thoughts. The town hall had been unsettling enough, but this was different. Here, the town itself was present, alive in a way that didn't make sense. Not in the mechanical way of a building, not in the habitual way of pets or rats. Alive and intent, watching, reacting. I continued down the street, flashlight cutting through the murk. The fog seemed to pulse with me, thickening where I paused, thinning where I walked, almost guiding me along the cracked sidewalks. I passed a row of houses, each door responding, each window alive with movement that wasn't movement, curtains shifting, floors settling, shadows stretching at impossible angles. The next house I approached had a front door with peeling green paint. My hand instinctively reached for the knob, but I hesitated. The heat radiating through the wood was insistent now, nearly tangible. I felt my own heartbeat echo through my chest, and then I noticed footprints. Not old prints, not the weather impressions of the past. Fresh, small, deliberate, leading from the sidewalk to the porch, but none returning. I swallowed hard. My mind scrambled for explanation. A prank? Animals? The fog played tricks. But the heat, the pressure, the almost aware movements, I knew instinctively that none of it was natural. I glanced down the street. At the corner, another house's shutters rattled softly. I swear the sound was in rhythm with my own pulse. I stepped forward cautiously. The porch groaned. The door, slightly ajar, seemed to lean toward me, as if curious, and I felt a flicker of something in the air, a recognition, like it knew I was there before I arrived. I forced myself to move closer, my boots pressed into the wet pavement, each step echoing against the fog. A curtain twitched, the heat intensified, and then a whisper, almost inaudible, barely threading through the mist. "You shouldn't be here." I jerked my head, scanning the house, but there was nothing. Only fog, only doors that watched, only heat that shouldn't exist. My radio crackled again. Nothing intelligible, just static, punctuated by faint, ghostly clicks. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. The next house was larger, Victorian style, sagging with age. I approached slowly, noticing the windows. One on the second floor had a faint glow, but there was no light fixture visible. The fog inside the windows shimmered unnaturally, like it was breathing. I felt the pressure again, this time at my chest, as if I was being pressed backward by something unseen. I had to remind myself to breathe. Slowly, carefully, I crouched slightly, shining the flashlight upward at the window. The fog twisted, revealing a vague silhouette, not detailed, not human, but aware. I blinked and it vanished, but the warmth remained, a presence, observing, waiting. I stepped back, flashlight trembling. My rational mind fought against a creeping terror. Houses don't watch. Doors don't lean. Wood doesn't breathe. And yet, every cell in my body screamed otherwise. Every instinct, honed through years of night shifts and dangerous calls, told me that these buildings were not inert. They were aware. I kept moving street by street, row by row. Each house responded differently. Some remained silent. Others seemed to hum faintly, vibrate under my feet. Some windows glimmered with fleeting shapes, almost, but not quite human. I began to feel trapped, hemmed in by awareness. The fog was thick, the night still, and the streets were labyrinthine, repeating in subtle, unnerving ways. And then I noticed it. One house had a door that followed me. Not literally, of course, but every time I turned my flashlight back, the crack in the door shifted, leaning toward me, tilting in silent attention. My pulse raced. I whispered my own name to reassure myself, but it felt like the fog echoed it back, distorted, mocking. I paused at the end of the block. The houses behind me were silent now, watching, waiting. The heat had receded, but the awareness lingered. I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't just walking the streets. I was in a town that had been waiting, decades perhaps, for someone to notice, to be counted, to be observed. The fog pressing closer, chilling me to the bone. Every door along this block held intent, and I felt it now, unmistakably. Curiosity, patience, judgment. I had entered a place where the structures themselves remembered, and I was a trespasser. I glanced back one final time. The doors were still, but the subtle lean, the faint heat, the unplaceable awareness remained. I understood then that Redstone was not empty in the fog, the buildings, the streets. They were alive in a way I could never leave behind. I exhaled slowly, stepping off the sidewalk, back toward my cruiser. The fog followed, thick and watchful, curling around my legs as if reluctant to release me. I glanced at the nearest house one last time. The door did not move. The windows did not shimmer. But I could feel it, the lingering presence of all those unseen watchers. And I knew with certainty I would not forget. Redstone was not a town. It was a record, a waiting room, a place that observed those who dared to see it. And that night, I had seen enough. I knew by the time I reached the next block that something had changed. The fog was no longer just a veil. It felt like a presence itself, heavier now, curling into my chest with every step. The street lights did little to push it back. Shadows pulled unnaturally at the edges of my flashlight, stretching in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And that's when I saw them. Figures in doorways, motionless, unblinking, perfectly still in a way that terrified me most. Not statues, not mannequins, not anything natural, but alive, somehow alive. Their bodies leaned just slightly, almost imperceptibly, like they were aware of my approach. I swallowed hard, and my throat felt thick, dry, as if the fog itself was trying to fill my lungs. They didn't move when I passed. They didn't breathe, and yet I could feel them watching. A heat, faint but insistent, radiated from each one. I stepped carefully along the cracked sidewalk, keeping my flashlight trained on the nearest figure. The light caught the hollow glint of an eye, or what I assumed was an eye, and for a fraction of a second, it felt like recognition. I tried to rationalize it. Night shift exhaustion, fog playing tricks, the human brain's tendency to anthropomorphize. But that rational part of me, the sheriff, the man who had seen accidents, drownings, deranged killers, knew better. This was something else. Something that didn't obey the rules of the world. I stopped in front of the first house. The figure in the doorway was tall, thin, its posture unerringly perfect. My flashlight's beam trembled in my hand, bouncing across the empty porch. The air was cold, but the figure radiated warmth. A warmth that was alive, intentional. I could feel it pressing outward, as if the house itself, through the figure, was testing me, measuring me. I swallowed. Evening, I said. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the fog. Nothing answered. Of course nothing answered. But I felt the weight of observation, like a hand on my shoulder. I took another step forward. My boots creaked against the wet wood of the porch. The figure didn't flinch, didn't breathe, and yet its presence was oppressive. I realized suddenly it didn't need air, not breathing, not movement, not anything that kept living things alive. And that made it worse. I stepped back, my heart hammering. The next figure appeared further down the street, in another doorway, almost as if it had been waiting for me to look away. I couldn't tell if it had moved or if I had just noticed it. My flashlight's beam shook as I panned down the block, and I counted 5, 6, 7 figures in doorways, each silent, each impossibly still. I tried to convince myself to keep walking. Routine check, right? Just census, just empty houses. But these weren't houses, and these weren't people, not in any sense of logic or biology. Each figure radiated awareness, and I could feel my pulse spike with fear. One of them, closer now, was shorter, hunched slightly, its head tilted toward me, as if acknowledging my presence. I froze. Time stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, each thump echoing against the fog. I swallowed again, painfully, and then the unthinkable happened. The figure blinked. Not a normal blink, not a human blink, more like a shutter closing and opening, deliberate, a motion that shouldn't exist in a living body. My stomach clenched. The air seemed heavier. My flashlight flickered. I realized I wasn't just being observed anymore. I was being studied. Me, my fear, my hesitation, my every micro-movement. I backed up slowly, trying not to turn my back. The fog shifted in response, curling around the figures like it was breathing with them. I stumbled slightly, boots scraping against wet pavement, and every figure remained motionless, except for that single, impossible blink that repeated at intervals. My radio crackled. Static, just static. But then I thought I heard a whisper beneath it, a low, guttural syllable that didn't belong to any human tongue. I shook my head. Maybe it was a fog again. Maybe it was me losing my mind. But I couldn't deny the feeling creeping through me, that dread that reached down into my bones. I turned to move faster, toward the next street, toward my cruiser. But the layout of the town had changed. Blocks that had been clear when I arrived were now lined with more doorways, more figures. Each one perfectly still, each one impossibly alive. My flashlight caught something at the corner of my vision. Movement that was not movement. I turned, and the figure hadn't moved, yet its head seemed to be following me. I tried to call dispatch, tried to explain, But the radio only hissed, static swallowing my voice. And then, faintly, I heard the figures, low, almost imperceptible exhalations, synchronized but not human. No lungs, no mouths, just breathing or something like it. I turned back toward the row of houses I had just passed. One of the figures was no longer in the doorway. It stood halfway on the sidewalk, still impossibly still, staring. I froze. The fog thickened, curling around it, blending into the night. Yet I could feel its presence pressing, insistent, undeniable. I forced myself to walk. Keep moving. Keep moving. Every step was measured, careful, boots pressing into waterlogged asphalt. The fog shifted with me, and I realized with a sinking horror that it wasn't just fog. It was an extension of them, the town, the watchers, pressing against me, molding around my body, pushing me toward the heart of Redstone. Another figure appeared at the next doorway, smaller this time. Its posture was wrong, elbows bending at angles that shouldn't exist, its head turned with perfect coordination, a slow, deliberate rotation that made my stomach lurch. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, and yet my body was trapped in frozen horror. The streetlights flickered, my flashlight's beam wavered, and then I noticed the windows of the houses. Shadows inside that shouldn't have been shadows, elongated, twisting toward me, as if the very structures of the town were leaning forward. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over uneven concrete. I whispered to myself, trying to hold my mind together. This isn't real. This isn't real. Just fog, just old buildings, just... But I couldn't finish. A figure in the nearest doorway stepped forward. Or maybe it didn't. My mind refused to understand. It just leaned. That was enough. Leaning without movement, bending reality, radiating awareness. The fog thickened around me, filling my lungs, my ears, my eyes. I was swallowed by it, trapped between the watching figures and the impossibility of leaving. I realized, suddenly, the truth. They didn't need air. They didn't need food. They didn't need life. They were something else. And yet, they were aware of me. My fear, my hesitation, my every involuntary movement. They studied me. They counted me. They waited. I backed away slowly, trying to force my mind to rationalize, to escape. But the town shifted subtly, doors leaning, figures tilting, fog twisting. Every house, every doorway, every shadow seemed to lean toward me now, pressing, patient, unblinking. I reached the edge of the block. My cruiser was just visible through the fog, but the figures had multiplied. New ones appeared in doorways I passed. Windows flickered with movement that wasn't movement. And I realized with a sick certainty that leaving wouldn't be simple. That these people, these figures, didn't just observe. They adapted. They responded. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But I couldn't risk looking away. I turned my flashlight over each doorway, counting, breathing, noting. But the number kept growing. The figures didn't need air, and they didn't need rest. They were patient, eternal, watching. And I, trapped in the fog-drenched streets of Redstone, realized I was the intruder. I finally made it to the cruiser, sliding inside with shaking hands. The fog pressed against the windows. The figures still leaning, still unblinking, still aware. I locked the doors and started the engine. As I pulled onto the main road, I glanced back. The houses were silent again. No figures in the doorways. No heat radiating from the wood. Only fog curling around empty streets. But I could feel them, watching, waiting, and I knew. As long as I had breath, I would never forget the way the people who don't need air had counted me that night. I never thought I'd see it so clearly. Not at first. Not until the numbers on my clipboard began to shift, almost imperceptibly. The names weren't just on paper anymore. They were alive in some sense, stretching, reshaping, as if the census itself were breathing. Redstone had been a quiet town, too quiet. And at first I blamed the fog, the cold, the endless night pressing down on the streets. But standing on Main Street, flashlight in hand, I realized that wasn't it. The people, or whatever they were, weren't confined to doorways anymore. They were everywhere, in the shadows, in the spaces between streetlights, in the fog curling around me like fingers. I checked the list again. A name I'd written 10 minutes ago, an old man, Thomas Weller, was crossed off. I knew he lived here or at least the record said he did. But the strange thing, he appeared again. And then another, and then a third. The entries multiplied silently. Impossible additions that I hadn't typed, hadn't seen. I felt my stomach tighten. My heart hammered. The numbers weren't numbers anymore. They were living things stretching across the town, like threads I couldn't untangle. And as I looked up from the clipboard, the town itself seemed to pulse in response. The buildings leaned slightly toward me. Shadows shifted where no shadow should have been. The fog thickened. The houses were no longer empty. Windows reflected faces I didn't recognize. Faces that weren't there before. They were brief, vanishing as quickly as I noticed them, but I could feel the presence persistent like a pressure against my chest. And then I understood the town wasn't just populated by the living, and it wasn't just haunted, it was growing. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was tired, night shift exhaustion, fog playing tricks. But the warmth I felt radiating from the empty houses didn't lie. It wasn't just heat, it was awareness, attention, and it was directed at me. I walked slowly, trying to keep my flashlight steady. Each step was measured, careful, like threading through a field of unseen needles. I passed a corner where I had seen the figures in doorways the night before. Nothing, just fog curling over cracked pavement. But my eyes caught movement in the corner of my vision. A shadow bending at a wrong angle, vanishing when I looked directly. I stopped. The clipboard trembled in my hands. I turned it over and saw the names had changed again. A family of 3 I had no memory of seeing was now written on the page, along with addresses I had already visited. I just knew, they weren't normal residents. Something else had been added to the town, and had been growing while I watched. The fog seemed to pulse, thickening around my boots, rising like smoke from unseen fires. I looked toward the end of the street. The streetlights flickered, dimming and brightening, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes, long and thin, riding between the lamplight. Shapes that shouldn't exist, shapes that counted. And in that moment, I realized they had been counting me too. A sound drew my attention, a soft scraping, like claws over wet wood. I turned sharply toward the old bakery at the corner. The door was closed, but I could see it breathe, or at least it seemed to, swelling outward and contracting, pulsing with a life of its own. And when I looked closer, I saw a shadow, taller than any person should be, leaning just inside, its head tilted. Studying me, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The clipboard slipped from my hands, landing face up. The names and addresses writhed before my eyes, letters stretching and twisting, forming new names that had never been in Redstone before. New names I had never seen, but somehow new. Names that should not exist. I backed away, feeling my sanity teetering on the edge. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but the fog thickened, pressing against me, twisting around my legs like grasping hands. I realized then that leaving wasn't simple. The town wasn't static. It was a living entity, reshaping itself, feeding off me, adapting. The figures appeared again, stepping from the shadows at the edges of the street. Their faces were unfamiliar, but familiar, each one perfectly still, radiating warmth that pressed against my chest. And as I looked, more names appeared on the clipboard. More people added in ways that made no sense. I tried calling dispatch again. My voice trembled. Dispatch, this is Sheriff. Redstone, need backup. The radio crackled, static swallowing my words. And then I heard it. A voice low and slow, repeating my own name. Not human, not alive, but somehow knowing me intimately. My stomach lurched. The figures didn't move, but I felt their attention sharpen, piercing into me, reading me, mapping me. I tried to shake my head, to clear my thoughts, but the clipboard continued to writhe in my hands. I could feel it, some part of the town itself, reaching into the world, trying to drag me in, measure me, count me. The numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were entities, each one a presence added to Redstone, and they were growing growing toward me, around me, within me. I stumbled, almost falling into the fog. My flashlight flickered, and then I realized the houses weren't just watching. They were learning. I had passed the corner store earlier tonight. Now, as I look back, I could see its windows moving, shifting angles, framing me differently, aligning itself toward my gaze. I felt trapped in a living camera, being documented, recorded, counted. The fog thickened even more, rising to my knees, then my waist. I could barely see the streetlights now, and yet I could sense them everywhere. Figures leaning from doorways, shadows stretching from the windows, shapes crawling along rooftops that defied gravity. They were multiplying, subtly, impossibly, growing in number while I stared. I realized then with a sick certainty, the town didn't need me to see it to exist. Redstone had always been alive. It had always been growing, always adding, always reshaping itself. And I had stepped inside it, thinking I was just patrolling, thinking I was safe, thinking I was alone. But I was not alone. I had never been alone. The clipboard slipped again, and I caught it with shaking hands. The writing now covered every page. Names I recognized, names I didn't. Families, children, strangers. Names of people I had never met, who couldn't exist, yet somehow did. Each one radiated the same awareness that pressed from the fog. The houses, the figures. Each one a part of the town, growing, counting, observing. I realized the truth then, the terrifying, undeniable truth. Redstone's population had always been more than human. It had always included something else, something patient, something infinite. And now it was aware of me. It was ensnaring me. Every step I took, every breath I drew, every hesitation, it responded, folding the streets around me, adding to its tally. I turned toward the cruiser. But the streets had shifted. The block I had just passed was now longer, narrower, lined with new doorways, new figures that I didn't recognize. The fog had risen to obscure the horizon. I was trapped in a labyrinth of observation, counted and documented by presences that did not need air, did not need life. They only needed awareness. My chest tightened. I tried to run. My boots splashed through puddles that weren't there moments ago. And everywhere I looked, the figures leaned toward me. Windows bent, fog twisted. They weren't coming after me in any conventional sense. They didn't need to. I was already inside their system, already part of their count, already observed, already added. The clipboard fell finally, landing face up. I looked down at it one last time. The names had stopped writhing. They were static, permanent, infinite. And at the very bottom of the page, written in letters I didn't recognize, was one new name. My name. I could feel the town exhale, the fog curling upward, figures leaning back into doorways, shadows retreating into windows, all breathing as one. I understood then that leaving wasn't an option. Redstone didn't allow departures. It only accepted additions, and I had been added. I stumbled, shaking, trying to hold on to some rational thought. But every instinct told me I had crossed a line. Every shadow told me I had entered something eternal, something alive, something patient. The town had counted me, and I knew, in a way too deep to explain, that it would continue to count, grow, and wait, long after I was gone, long after anyone else dared to enter. I don't know how long I stood there in the fog, clutching the clipboard, heart hammering, surrounded by the subtle, breathing awareness of the town. Time had no meaning, only counting, only presence, only growth. Redstone itself had expanded tonight, and I was now part of it. The fog whispered around me as I finally turned toward the cruiser. Every step weighted with terror. Every breath a reminder that I was not alone. The figures were still. They were patient. They were infinite. And I realized with a final, sinking certainty that Redstone would never stop growing, and neither would its population. And I was counted. I parked my car on the cracked asphalt of Main Street and let the engine idle for a moment, watching fog curl along the edges of the buildings like smoke from a long-dead fire. The GPS had said Red Hollow, population 212, but the place looked abandoned. Windows boarded up, paint peeling, signs swinging silently in the wind. And yet there was light, A warm, golden glow spilled from the doorway of a bar halfway down the street. Music, or maybe laughter, drifted out, faint but distinct, breaking the silence of the empty town. I frowned, gripping my camera bag. This wasn't in any travel guides. In fact, the town didn't even show up on most maps. But I'd come for places like this. The forgotten, the eerie, the towns that felt like they had been swallowed by time. Stepping onto the cracked sidewalk, I felt the fog thicken around my ankles. My boots made soft, squelching sounds against the damp asphalt. The closer I got to the bar, the warmer the air became, as if the building itself exhaled heat. And I could swear I heard murmurs, voices too soft to distinguish but unmistakably human. "Don't be shy," he said, tilting the bottle toward a glass in front of me. "Everyone needs a taste." I shook my head, trying to sound confident. I don't drink." He didn't press. He only smiled wider, the corners of his mouth stretching just a little too far. "Then watch. See how it's done." I could feel the room pulling my gaze. I looked at a table near the far corner, where a man sat alone. He had a mug of something dark in his hands. He lifted it slowly, held it to his lips, and drank. The liquid never moved. It didn't ripple. His throat didn't contract. Yet, somehow, I felt the way of that act. A memory of taste, a memory of warmth. My stomach knotted. I couldn't look away. I wandered between tables, careful to keep a distance. Every patron's eyes, some open, some half-closed, some just present, tracked me. I realized that the air itself felt heavier near them, thickened by some invisible presence, like their attention had mass and gravity. I raised my camera, snapping pictures at several tables. Each time, the screen blinked and returned nothing. The patrons were real in motion, but unreal in substance. I caught a reflection in a polished bottle near the bar, and it froze me solid. There, in the amber glass, I saw myself, and behind me, an extra shape, a shadow that mimicked a figure I couldn't locate in the room. It was faint, wavering, impossible to find, but I felt its eyes on me. And then, in the next instant, it was gone. The glass reflected only the bartender again. Only him. I took a deep breath, trying to shake the tension, and forced myself to speak to a woman sitting across from the bar. "Excuse me," I said. Are you? She turned her head slowly, looked at me, and smiled. She held a tiny glass in her hand, the liquid still frozen, unmoving. She lifted it toward me and said nothing, only waited. I realized I couldn't step closer. Something in that gesture carried weight, as if the glass itself carried a warning, a boundary. I stepped back. The temperature shifted again, warmer this time, like a wave. I could hear the faintest whisper, soft, almost inaudible, curling around the room. The music played, soft, jazz-like, but underneath, I swore I could hear murmurs saying words I couldn't understand. Words meant for the patrons. Words not meant for me. Words I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears. The bartender moved past me, wiping a glass that didn't exist, and leaned close. "Not everyone can see what's here," he said. "Some never notice. Some never leave." I swallowed. "Leave? How can I leave?" He straightened, eyes flicking toward the door, and smiled again. "The door is there, yes, but what matters is whether we'll let you out." I turned toward it. The glow from outside felt like a lie now. The fog pressing against the bar's windows seemed denser, as if alive, creeping inside to block me. And then I saw a movement. Across the tables, a figure stood, not walking, not raising glass, just standing. Its eyes met mine, unblinking, and I felt my knees weaken. It wasn't human. Or maybe it was once. The face was familiar in ways I couldn't place, like a photograph half remembered from childhood, but distorted. Its presence radiated hunger, expectation. I couldn't name the feeling, only that it pressed against my chest. I tried to speak, to tell myself it was a trick of my eyes. "I should go," I muttered. The patrons around it lifted their glasses again, in unison, sipping the impossible liquid. I realized with a chill that this wasn't just a bar for the living. It was a gathering place for those who were not. And me, I moved backward, trying to calm my breathing. The floor seemed longer than before, stretching out in unnatural angles. The lights flickered ever so slightly, and the music changed. Slower now, mournful. I could hear the echo of footsteps. Mine? No. Something following. Something moving without sound. The bartender caught my eye once more. "They can't leave. Not anymore," he said softly. "But you still have a choice." For now, I realized the air was thick with something I couldn't define. Heat from nowhere, cold from nowhere, smells that were impossible, like earth after rain, like metal, like burning paper, all at once. The patrons drank silently, watched silently, existing in a rhythm I was not part of. I fumbled for my camera again, snapping images frantically. Each time, the screen blinked empty. No evidence of them, no proof. Only shadows where there should have been light. Only air where there should have been presence. My chest tightened with panic. I could feel it. The weight of countless nights, countless patrons, all waiting, all trapped, all still here. And now I was part of that awareness. A figure at the far corner turned toward me, the light catching its face just enough. I swear it smiled, not with lips, but with the pull of its being. Invitation. Command. Warning. My stomach churned, and for the first time, I understood the terror of looking too closely at something that shouldn't exist. I bolted toward the door. The warmth of the outside fog hit me like a wave, but the doorway resisted, not physically, but in perception. The room seemed to stretch behind me, the space bending, elongating. The patrons' heads turned, all of them, toward me in perfect synchrony, and I heard it again, the whispering, soft, overlapping, unintelligible, but I knew the meaning. Stay. I lunged into fog outside, tripping over the uneven sidewalk, heart hammering. The bar's lights flickered, then went out. Silent, empty, and yet the feeling remained. Something had marked me. I could feel it in my chest, in my eyes, in the hollow echo of my footsteps. The fog swirled in unnatural shapes as I sprinted to my car. Every step was a battle against the invisible pull that seemed to reach for me from behind. I didn't look back, not once. As I drove away, the streetlights flickered on normally, the fog thinning, the air returning to its mundane nightly chill. But in my rear-view mirror, I thought I saw a glass lift tilt and drink. No one was there. Red Hollow had noticed me. The patrons had acknowledged me. And somewhere deep inside the warmth of that bar that wasn't a bar, something waited, waiting for the next time I might return. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop seeing them in the periphery of my vision. The faces without reflections. The drinks that didn't exist. The presence that filled the room like water. And in the quiet moments, when the world outside felt real, I could still hear the whisper of glasses, the soft clink of impossible toasts. They were alive, somehow, and dead. And I had seen them. And now they had seen me. I thought running had been enough. I thought that leaving the bar, stumbling into the fog outside, chasing the safety of headlights and asphalt, would sever whatever thread had tied me to Red Hollow. But I was wrong. The town never felt distant. Every time I blinked, the bar hovered at the edge of my vision, tucked behind fog that shouldn't have stayed so low in the valleys at night. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. The adrenaline, the exhaustion, the lingering fear. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something alive. Something waiting. The door never opened. Time never passed. Music never ended. And the patrons, always patient, always watching, always drinking, continued. I understood the truth of the bar, the town, and myself. Once seen, always seen. Once counted, never gone. And I had joined them. The mountains were quiet when I arrived. Not the kind of quiet that lets you hear birds or wind rustling through pine needles, but a heavy, expectant silence that pressed against the car like a weight. My GPS of the town was active, but the road narrowed, cracked, and then simply ended at a cluster of buildings that looked forgotten. I pulled over, the tires crunching on gravel, and stepped out. Rain had started, thin at first, sliding down the slopes like silver ribbons. The smell of wet earth filled my nostrils, but beneath it was something else, something metallic, faint, almost like iron, and it made my stomach knot. The town looked normal enough at first. Wooden buildings with peeling paint. Rusted signs swinging in the wind. Mailboxes at the edge of the road. But there was no movement. No life. I waited, half expecting a dog to bark, a car to hum in the distance, but there was nothing. I checked the GPS again. Yes, Maple Ridge, active population, 74. I laughed bitterly. 74? There was no one here. Not even a single silhouette behind the cracked windows. Only the steady patter of rain, and the faint creak of a sign swinging in the wind. I shrugged and slung my satchel over my shoulder. Temporary assignment. Just deliver the mail. Check the boxes. It was routine. A quiet night shift in a quiet town. Nothing could go wrong. I started with the closest mailbox. It was empty, save for a single letter with a blue stamp. I held it in my hand, studying the envelope. My name wasn't on it, but the handwriting made me hesitate. It wasn't familiar. Not exactly. It felt deliberate, insistent, like it knew I would see it. I shook it off and moved to the next house. Number 12 Maple Street. The front door was ajar. The hinges groaned softly as I nudged it with my shoulder, pushing the envelope through the slot. Inside, the darkness seemed too heavy. Shadows clung to the corners of the room, stretching along the walls like fingers. I caught a glimpse of something. Just a flicker, a reflection on the glass of a picture frame. Something moved. But when I blinked, there was nothing. The wind picked up, rattling the door. I stepped back, heart hammering. Just the wind, I muttered to myself. But the cold that slid along my spine said otherwise. I could feel eyes, though I knew no one was here to watch. House after house, mailbox after mailbox. It was the same, empty, silent, except for the letters. I started noticing a pattern. Some were address of residence I had never heard of. Names that didn't exist in any record I could check on my handheld. I tried not to think about it, but the unease grew. At number 22 Maple Street, I noticed the mailbox was already open. Inside, instead of mail, there was a single card folded neatly. I pulled it out. Black ink on cream cardstock, cursive handwriting. Do not leave. They are watching. A shiver ran down my spine. My pulse quickened. They... who? I whispered to the empty air. No answer. Only the wind carrying the faint scent of something like smoke. Something burned, lingering in the shadows. I left the card and moved on, convincing myself it was a prank or some leftover joke from the last carrier. But then I realized all the houses had no footprints leading to them. No tire marks. No signs of life at all. And yet, the doors weren't locked. The fog rolled in from the valley, thick and wet, curling around the corners of the buildings. I could barely see the next mailbox now. I squinted through the gray, the rain making patterns on my glasses that didn't match the drizzle. There was a figure, I thought, at the edge of the fog. Just a shadow. Pale, thin, unmoving. My stomach dropped. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a tree branch, anything. But when I took a step closer, the shadow shifted slightly, though not enough to seem human. A shudder passed through me. My hands gripped the satchel tighter. The letters in my bag felt heavier, suddenly, like they carried more than paper and ink. Number 31 Maple Street. The mailbox rattled violently as I approached, though the wind was calm here. The letters inside were stacked neatly, each addressed to someone who had no home, no life, no record anywhere. I could feel a pulse in the paper, a vibration faint but persistent, as if the town itself were breathing through these envelopes. I reached for them, and the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath came out in clouds. I felt eyes at my back, not just at the mailbox, not in the window, everywhere. I turned slowly, scanning the fog, the houses, the darkened streets. Nothing moved, and yet I knew I wasn't alone. The rain intensified, hammering the rooftops and the asphalt in unnatural bursts. It wasn't wind-driven. It was directed, almost conscious. The drop struck my shoulders like cold nails, yet some slid down my back as if avoiding me. The sensation made my skin crawl. I stepped back from the mailbox. My boot slipped on the wet gravel, and I fell hard. The satchel opened, letters spilling out. I scrambled to gather them, and one slid into the fog. I ran after it, heart pounding, my lungs burning. The mist thickened around me, swallowing my vision, twisting the path behind me. I stopped. The letter floated in the air in front of me, not falling, not caught on a branch, just suspended, trembling slightly. I reached out, trembling, and the moment my fingers brushed it, a voice whispered, so faint I almost doubted it. "You shouldn't be here." I jerked back, stumbling, landing on my knees. The fog swirled, carrying the faintest echoes. Footsteps that weren't mine, breathing that didn't match any human pattern. My heart raced. I felt watched, recorded, cataloged, like the town itself was scanning me, determining where I fit in its strange ledger. I gathered the rest of the letters, my hands shaking. Each one seemed to thrum with life. Names, addresses, notes, some mundane, some warning, all pointing toward a continuity that made no sense. The town should have been dead, empty, yet the mail existed. The mail persisted. And now, so did the fog. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This was a temporary assignment. I reminded myself. Just a shift. Nothing real. Nothing permanent. Just a town, abandoned or not, waiting for its mail to be delivered. But the air pressed closer, moist and heavy. I could feel it in my hair, on my skin. The buildings weren't simply abandoned. They were awake, watching, waiting. I stepped back to the car, satchel clutched to my chest. I dared to glance back at the town. In the windows of the bar at the center town, I thought I saw a shadow wave, a figure, or a trick of the fog. Impossible to say. My rational mind failed me. My instinct screamed. And still, I felt drawn inexplicably, as if a line had been drawn in the fog connecting me to this place. I drove slowly, the gravel crunching under the tires, ears straining for any sound that indicated life. But all I heard was the rain, the whisper of fog against metal, the weight of the town pressing silently against the world outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mailboxes, the letters, the shadow in the fog. The town had made its mark, quietly, without force, without a single word. I was aware that it had acknowledged me, cataloged me, counted me in some way I didn't understand. And I knew the fog wasn't just weather. It was intelligence, observation. It would follow me home, follow me to the next shift, linger in the corners of my mind like the faint taste of iron on my tongue. I would return. I didn't want to, but I would, because the mail was never finished, because the town and its quiet, terrible persistence wanted me to finish what it started, and I inexplicably wanted to see it through. The mountains were quiet again, though not naturally. The fog drifted in the valleys below, curling like smoke, whispering of names yet to be spoken. I felt the letters thrum in my bag, and I realized finally that the town wasn't just abandoned. It was patient. It had always been patient. And now, so was I. The next morning, or what felt like morning, I returned to the mountain road. The fog had lifted slightly, but the town was no less silent. My satchel weighed heavier than it should, as if every letter it carried had absorbed some of the night's cold, some of the fog's patience. I set the letters down on the hood of my car and sifted through them. Most were ordinary bills, advertisements. A few bills returned to sender, but then I noticed the dates. Tomorrow, every single one. The postmarks were fresh, the handwriting unfamiliar. Yet the stamps were old, faded in ways that made no sense for something just mailed. I laughed nervously, rubbing at the fog of sleep, still clouding my eyes. Maybe I'm seeing things, I muttered, but I wasn't. The first letter I picked up was addressed to a resident named Eleanor Haskins. I had checked the municipal records, the census, everything. She didn't exist. But the letter detailed something horrific. Her car skidding off the cliff at sunrise, her daughter trapped inside, screaming, calling for help that would never arrive. My stomach turned. My hand shook. I dropped the envelope back onto the hood. It fluttered as though alive, whispering against the cold metal. I could feel the weight of its words, the inevitability. I tried another. This one was for Franklin Duval, a man whose mailbox I had passed last night. The letter described a fire in his kitchen, a stove left on, smoke filling the small house, neighbors knocking frantically, the flames spreading too fast to escape. The details were vivid, precise, and yet Franklin Duval was a ghost in a town that didn't exist. I slammed the satchel shut, heart pounding. This isn't real, I whispered, voice cracking. But the letters wouldn't be ignored. I felt their insistence. A pull toward the street, toward the mailbox of number 22. I approached it carefully. The rain had started again, soft at first, then hammering against the asphalt with a deliberate rhythm. I glanced around. No one, only the town silent, watching. I slid the first letter into the slot. The second followed. Each one seemed heavier than the last, carrying a weight I could not lift. Then I noticed a new one, resting on top of the pile. I hadn't seen it before. It was addressed to me. I froze. My name was written clearly, neatly, in black ink. The postmark dated tomorrow. My hand shook as I reached for it. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see what it said. And yet, I could not. The envelope split easily under my fingers. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed, precise, chilling in its simplicity. Do not leave the town tonight. You will not return. I laughed, sharp and hollow, thinking it was some kind of prank. But the hair on my arm stood on end. The words weren't just instructions. They were warnings, and not suggestions. I glanced around the empty street. The fog had returned in patches, curling around the corners of the buildings like fingers reaching for me. I could feel it watching, waiting for my next move. The letters continued to arrive, almost instantly, though I had not seen a mail carrier a hand or even a delivery vehicle. One appeared on the ground by my feet. Another slid under the mailbox's slot, bending slightly as though aware of my hesitation. Each letter contained more than mundane news. They were filled with reports, missing people, accidents, arguments that would erupt, animals gone missing, items misplaced, windows shattering. All of it precise. All of it dated for tomorrow. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some elaborate prank. Maybe someone in town had been playing a long game, sending letters in advance, predicting events in a way I couldn't understand. But the more I read, the less plausible that seemed. The events were small, personal, impossibly specific, and yet they were all true, or they would be, according to the letters. One letter described a man who lived 3 streets over being struck by a falling branch. The exact time of day, the angle of the fall, the color of his shirt. I hadn't even seen him. I didn't know his name, and yet it was here. I could almost feel the inevitability pressing down on me, like the rain, like the fog, like the town itself. I set the letters down, hands trembling. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to drive back down the mountain road, and never look back. But my body refused. I felt tethered, as if each envelope had wrapped a strand of invisible thread around me. Pulling away felt impossible. Then I heard it, not a sound in the conventional sense, a vibration in the air, low and deliberate, like a breath behind me. I turned sharply, eyes scanning the street, the houses, the shadows. Nothing, but I knew I was not alone. The wind carried a faint rustle, paper against paper. My letters. The stack on the hood shifted, fluttered, almost as though rearranging themselves. I stepped back, heart hammering. One of the envelopes lifted slightly, hovering, then fell neatly back into place. I staggered backward, clutching my satchel. The letters had become heavier, almost solid in a way that made no sense. I could feel their words vibrating through my fingers. And then I understood. This wasn't about mail. Not really. It was about observation, cataloging, prediction. Each letter was a thread, and I was entangled in the weave. The town wasn't dead. It wasn't silent. It was alive in a way I couldn't name, and it was recording me, watching me, shaping reality in small, meticulous ways. Another envelope slid across the hood toward me. I caught it. It bore my name again. I tore it open with shaking hands. The words inside weren't typed this time. They were scrawled, hurried, almost frantic. Do not read the others. You will not survive the night if you do. I froze. My mind spun. How could this be? How could the town, the letters, know my thoughts, my actions? Even before I acted, the fog pressed closer now, dense and wet, curling around my boots, sliding up my legs. I could feel it try and pull me forward, into the street, into the houses, into the inevitability. I dropped the envelope. It landed upright, facing me, though nothing else in the world should have done that. My pulse pounded, my chest tight. I wanted to run, to drive back down the mountain road, to escape the impossible logic of this place. But I couldn't. The letters whispered, not with words, but with the weight of intention, the subtle pull of inevitability. One by one, I read them despite myself. Each one confirmed the last. Accidents, disappearances, arguments, chaos. All precise, all coming tomorrow, all inescapable. I tried another house, number 30. The mailbox was empty. I set the letters in anyway. They disappeared, sinking into the slot, and a chill swept across my back, like a hand brushing my spine. I jumped, shivering. It was gone, or so I thought. Later, when I checked my bag, that letter had returned, folded, precise, scrawled with my name. My name. Again. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't comprehend how it had returned, how it had moved, how the town was manipulating the letters, the mail, the very reality around me. The more I delivered, the heavier the bag became. I could feel it pulling at my shoulder, at my arms, at my thoughts. Each house seemed to count me, judge me, evaluate whether I belonged here, whether I was ready to see what lay beyond the walls, beyond the mail. I wasn't delivering mail anymore. I was delivering myself. The fog pressed thicker now, sliding under doors, curling around the mailbox at number 14. I stopped, hands shaking, sweat mixing with the damp mist. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to drive down the mountain and pretend this job didn't exist. But some instinct, some whisper in my mind, told me I couldn't leave. Not yet. The mailboxes that refused delivery had become more than obstacles. They were sentinels, guardians of secrets too vast for me to comprehend. And I, with my letters, my hands, my trembling curiosity, was intruding. By the time I finished my rounds, the sky had darkened unnaturally. The fog thickened to a soup, blurring the houses into shadowed shapes. The letters in my bag shifted, rustling, almost alive. I realized, with a sinking horror, that tonight the mail would not rest, and neither would the houses. I drove back slowly, clutching the satchel, glancing at every shadow, every window. I could feel them watching, waiting, knowing. I didn't understand how or why, but I knew. Certain homes rejected, resisted, and the letters obeyed forces beyond me. I was not just a mail carrier anymore. I was a witness, a participant, a part of the town's impossible geometry, where letters, fog, and walls conspired in silence. I stopped at the edge of town. The last mailbox I had tried, the first one that rejected me this morning, flickered in the distance, a shadow against a mist. I could feel its gaze, its awareness, its patience. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But even as I gripped the wheel, I felt the letters shift in my bag. They weren't done with me. Not yet. And I knew, in the deepest part of myself, that the houses weren't just protecting something. They were teaching me, waiting for me to understand the rules, waiting for me to see. And when I finally did, I wouldn't be able to look away, because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. It started the moment I opened the satchel that morning. Rain still clung to the branches outside, slicking the roads with mist that smelled faintly of metal and wet earth. I had finished my usual rounds yesterday, or at least what I thought was usual, and packed the remaining letters back into the bag. That's when I noticed it. A single envelope, yellowed and stiff, resting on top like it had been waiting for me. At first, I thought I had dropped it yesterday, overlooked it, but the postmark froze me in place. It wasn't today's date, or even yesterday's. It was dated 6 years ago. 6 years ago. I picked it up with trembling fingers, the paper rough against my skin. My name was scrawled across it in ink I didn't recognize, but the handwriting was precise, deliberate. I knew it was meant for me. I had no memory of writing it, no memory of sending it, or receiving it. The air around me thickened. My lungs felt heavier, as though the envelope itself carried weight beyond paper and ink. The fog outside pressed close to the window, curling like a living thing. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to ignore it. But some part of me, the part that had been unraveling since I arrived in this town, urged me to open it. I slit the envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting inside was the same as the outside. Every line, every word, was familiar yet foreign, as if my own mind had written it long before I existed. And the words chilled me. Do not trust the houses. Do not trust the fog. It watches. It waits. They are not empty. You are not alone. They know you are here. Do not leave your bag unattended. They will try to take it. They will try to take you. My chest tightened. I dropped the letter onto the table, heart hammering. The room seemed to darken around me, though the sun was still above the mountain. Shadows pooled in the corners, curling and shifting with a life of their own. I wanted to laugh, to shake it off as some prank, some trick of my fraying nerves. But the way the letter had appeared, and the way the words seemed to pulse with intent, I couldn't. I stuffed it back into the bag, hoping to shake off the feeling. But the second I did, the bag shifted in my hands. Not like a weight settling, not like the letters jostling naturally. It felt alive, writhing slightly, as though something inside it wanted to be noticed. I drove to my first delivery of the day, but every mile felt distorted. The roads didn't feel the same. Trees leaned closer to the truck, fog curling along the edges of the asphalt like fingers. Every house I passed seemed to exhale as I drove past, the shadows behind the curtains flickering even when the lights were out. When I arrived at number 12, a house I had delivered to countless times, the mailbox was empty, except for a single envelope, identical to the one in my bag. My name, the same. Handwriting. My stomach churned. I didn't move at first. I stared at it, frozen, wondering if the town had somehow shifted, if I was trapped in some repeating loop. I picked it up. The paper was warmer than it should have been, as though alive. I opened it carefully, hands shaking. The words inside were a continuation, a response, though I hadn't spoken anything aloud. You are being watched. They know the routes. They know the stops. They know your hesitation. Do not deliver the letters you see outside of the route. They are theirs, not yours. They hunger for recognition. They do not forgive intrusion. The bag sagged at my shoulder, heavier now. I felt every envelope inside, each one pulsing, shifting, as though aware of my awareness. My skin crawled. Something was following me, watching me, waiting. I tried to finish the deliveries quickly, hands trembling as I slid letters into boxes. But every mailbox that had resisted before now seemed to tremble as I approached. Number 14, the first house that had spat back my letters, quivered in the fog. I could feel a presence inside, coiling around the walls, pressing against the wood. I wanted to leave. I wanted to abandon the bag and run. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I understood. By midday, I was no longer delivering mail. I was being measured, judged. Every house I approached seemed to bend subtly toward me, the fog thickening around certain spots, thinning around others, guiding my path. And the letters, my letters, the ones from the past, the ones postmarked decades ago, were moving of their own accord, sliding from bag to box, obeying a rhythm I could not hear but felt in my bones. At number 18, the letter from 6 years ago slipped from my bag while I was fumbling with the mailbox. It floated lightly, almost teasingly, before settling perfectly inside the slot. I could not believe it. There was no wind, no hand, and yet it had moved. I stepped back, heart racing. The fog pressed closer, curling over the porch and around the windows. I could see shapes moving within, subtle shifts of shadow, like silhouettes practicing patience. The letter inside the slot was impossible to retrieve without opening the box. But even as I reached for it, I felt an invisible resistance, a weight keeping in place. I took a step back, hands trembling, and realized something worse. The letters weren't just messages. They were contracts, invitations, challenges. The town, the fog, the houses, they weren't passive. They were active. They were alive in a way I hadn't understood before. I tried to rationalize it. It had to be a trick of the weather, of the light, of my mind. But rational thought fled when I returned to the truck. The bag shifted again, heavier now, and when I opened it to check the remaining letters, another envelope had appeared, identical to the first, with my name written across it. No postmark this time. Just a handwriting, familiar and alien. I held it in my hands, shaking. Inside was a single line. The route is no longer yours. They have taken it. They have taken you. The ground beneath the truck seemed to shift. The fog rolled through the tires, curling upward like smoke. I looked back at the house, and in the shadowed window, I thought I saw a face, my own face, twisted, watching, waiting. I blinked. It was gone. Only the darkness remained, thick and patient. I drove slowly, unsure if I was leaving or being led. The letters in my bag pulsed with life. Each one seemed aware of my thoughts, my fear, my hesitation. The envelope from 6 years ago lay on top, staring at me, accusing, patient. I couldn't shake the feeling that every movement I made, every mile I drove, was anticipated. I was no longer delivering mail. I was part of the system, part of the town, part of something that existed outside of time, outside of reason. I tried to shake the envelope, to stuff it deep in the bag, but it returned to the top, as if it had chosen its place. I felt my pulse thrum in time with it. My mind couldn't escape the rhythm. The route, the houses, the fog, they were alive, watching, responding, waiting for my next move. By evening, the sun had gone entirely, and the fog had grown into a thick wall around the road. The mailbox at number 12, where the first impossible letter had appeared, rattled violently, the letters inside shifting like living things. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, shifting in ways that defied logic. I gripped the steering wheel and whispered, "I don't belong here." The envelope from 6 years ago slipped from my bag and landed on my lap. I opened it once more. The words inside now made my stomach twist with dread. "You have always belonged. You have always been part of this. Time does not touch us. You are ours now. Return the letters, or join them." I didn't know what it meant. Return them to whom? Join them? My hand shook as the truck idled, fog curling through the tires and around my boots. The letters weren't just mail. They weren't just warnings. They were invitations, demands, instructions from something older than memory, older than the town itself. I tried to drive. The road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, curling back upon itself, fog thick and unyielding. Every house I passed glimmered in the mist, windows dark, doors closed, waiting, and I could feel the letters pulsing, alive with intent. They were guiding me, forcing me, teaching me the rules I didn't yet understand. By nightfall, I realized the truth. I was no longer a mail carrier. I was no longer in control. The letters, the houses, the fog, they had me, and the envelope dated 6 years ago, the one addressed to me, postmarked from a past I hadn't lived, had confirmed it. I wasn't just delivering mail anymore. I was delivering myself, piece by piece, into something beyond time, beyond understanding, something patient, ancient, and awake. And as I drove deeper into the fog, clutching the bag, I knew it was only a matter of time before the next envelope appeared, one I would not be able to ignore, because in this town, the mail always returns. I've worked nights in the archive for years. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint smell of old paper and dust, the quiet rhythm of cataloging. I thought I understood it, thought I could handle it, until last week when the first anomaly appeared. It was a file labeled Claremont, population 43. I remember that town. I'd walked its streets on a road trip years ago. It wasn't small, not 43 people. The number didn't match anything in my memory. I shrugged it off, wrote it into the database, and moved on. That's my job, after all. I catalog, I log, I preserve, I don't question. But when the next folder slid out from the shelf, almost as if it had shifted on its own, I noticed a pattern. Towns I had never heard of, yet their files were detailed, precise. Reports of missing persons, fires that never appeared in newspapers, weather anomalies, and all postmarked decades ago. Some of the towns, maps erased, places forgotten, wiped from record. Yet here they were, meticulously documented. I pressed play on the audio recorder attached to the file. The hiss of tape filled the archive room, mingling with a faint whir of the AC. A voice began, steady and clipped, reporting the usual town census, street layouts, and names of residents. But something was off. The voice listed residents I knew had never existed. or perhaps had existed and vanished. There were dates of births, deaths, marriages, notes about professions, neighbors, even complaints filed with city councils. It was impossibly thorough. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. This had to be a misfile, an old project someone abandoned. Yet the more I listened, the more I noticed the subtle inconsistencies. The voice didn't pause where a human would. Didn't stumble over a name. It corrected itself mid-sentence, though I had no recollection of the initial phrasing. It was as if it knew I was listening. The next file I cataloged was even stranger. The tape started normally, but halfway through, I swore I heard my own voice whisper a line that I hadn't spoken, a thought I hadn't written. My heart thumped in the quiet archive room. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was fatigue. The nights are long, the hours monotonous. It's easy to start imagining things, but the whispers returned. On the third file, on the fourth, and each time they were more precise, more insistent. Not just recording the town, but commenting on me, my methods, the way I cataloged the files, the order I filed the papers. Sometimes the tape even paused, leaving a long silence before the voice resumed, describing my own movements in the dim light. I stopped cataloging for a moment, listening to the faint echo of the voice in the room. I should have unplugged the recorder. I should have walked out, but something kept me there. The compulsion was subtle, like a shadow brushing against the edge of my mind. And the files, I couldn't stop checking them, couldn't stop listening. I began to notice small details I had missed before. Dust patterns on the shelves shifting overnight. Faint scratches on the edges of cabinets that hadn't been there when I left. A faint warmth in the corners of the room. Sometimes I thought I saw movement at the periphery of my vision. Nothing tangible, no one ever there, but always a presence that made my skin crawl. One tape, labeled Havenport, 1962, froze me entirely. The voice listed residents, their professions, their birthdays, everything normal. Then it said something I could not reconcile. The archivist is observing. The archivist is seeing. The archivist is being noted. He will become part of the record. I dropped the recorder. The sound of it hitting the metal table seemed deafening. My pulse raced. My hands shook. I told myself it had to be a coincidence, a mislabeling, someone's notes left in the margin of the tape. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I tried to leave the archive. I reached the door, but my fingers froze. The door didn't lock, didn't stick, but it felt heavier than it should, like pushing through thick air. I looked around the room. Everything was in place. Nothing had moved. Nothing was out of order. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not just by the unseen, but by the files themselves. The next few nights, I worked compulsively. I cataloged every town, every tape, every folder. The voices became more coherent, more directed. They knew my name. They commented on my posture, my breathing, my hesitations. Sometimes I thought they were arguing amongst themselves, correcting one another's recordings. Sometimes I thought they were laughing, quietly, beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights, beneath the scratch of pen on paper, beneath the mechanical whir of fans. And then I noticed the anomalies, reports of events I had no memory of, letters written from people I had never met, weather patterns that made no sense, fires that destroyed towns that were still marked on maps as perfectly fine, bridges collapsed that I had driven across yesterday, names of people, neighbors, friends, strangers, all mixed into these files as if time itself had fractured. I began to dread the hours before dawn, the silence before the machine started up, the moments when the archive room seemed almost to breathe around me. Sometimes I would glance at the door and swear the shadows shifted against the edges, forming shapes that looked like hands, faces, impossible geometries, always just out of focus, always gone when I looked directly. Last night, I heard a knock, soft, from nowhere really, the walls, the ceiling, maybe even the floor, a single, sharp tap that made me jump despite the hours of sound around me. I told myself it was the old pipes, the building settling, the wind outside, but the tap came again, and then as I froze, I heard in the tape, not on the recording, not in the files, but in the silence between tracks, a soft echo of my own heartbeat. I ran the logs backward. rewound tapes I had listened to 100 times. And there it was, a whisper, faint, almost inaudible yet unmistakable. My own name, my own thoughts, my own footsteps. And beneath them, a faint, mocking laughter. I know now that the archive does not simply record history. It observes it, it preserves it, it comments on it, and it can reach beyond the boundaries of the paper and the tape. It sees me, catalogs me, notes me, even as I note the towns it has consumed. I cannot leave. Not yet. I don't know if I ever could. Something in me compels me to continue, compels me to listen, to file, to organize. The room breathes. The tapes whisper, and the towns speak through them. And I am their witness, their participant, their catalog archivist. I feel myself changing, slower, quieter, less certain, more aware. The walls are not just walls. The folders are not just folders. And the voices are always there, watching, correcting, waiting. I am part of it now. I can feel it. The logs, the files, the town themselves, they are alive in a way I cannot name. And as I sit here, listening to the next tape, I can hear it whispering again. He is here. He is recorded. He is ours. Always. And I know deep down that by tomorrow, I will no longer be just an archivist. I will be another entry in their records, another ghost catalog in a room that never forgets. I thought last night had been the worst. I thought the whispering tapes, the impossible towns, the faint warmth in the corners of the archive, those were the limits of whatever had drawn me here. But this morning, or whatever passed for morning in the endless fluorescent haze, I discovered something far worse. I came and checked the new files, as I always do, expecting perhaps a misfile, an old tape someone left behind. But the folders I found had no origin in the system, no date, no author, just neatly stacked, labeled with town names I had never seen before. I picked up the first, Hallow Ridge, population 67. I frowned. Hallow Ridge did not exist. It never had. I had memorized the old maps, the canceled census records, the files that were supposed to exist for these mountains. Nothing matched, and yet the file was precise, exact in its measurements, in its street grids, in its population breakdown. I turned on the recorder. A steady, mechanical voice began cataloging the streets, the homes, the families, names, dates, occupations, details impossible to verify because the town had been obliterated decades ago. Even so, the voice read them as if they were everyday facts, and then it said something that made my stomach knot. Hallow Ridge reports. The archivist watches. He notes. He files. Observation is noted. Observation is necessary. I dropped the recorder. The tape slipped from my hands, clattering across the metal table. I wanted to laugh, to tell myself it was fatigue, imagination, some trick of long nights and fluorescent light. But the way the voice said it, so calm, so certain, I could not. I picked it up again. I needed to hear more, to confirm that my mind wasn't fracturing. Each tape after that was the same. New towns appeared every night. Files sliding onto the desk as if the shelves themselves had produced them. Towns that had been wiped from maps. Towns that had burned. Towns that had never been. And every one included me, even in the ones I had never cataloged before. A footnote in a census. A shadow in a photograph. A reference in a diary. Archivist observed. Data logged. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. I had read every rule, every note in the archivist's handbook, and nothing mentioned this. I was not supposed to interact with the material this way. I was not supposed to be observed. And yet, in the quiet of the archive, I could feel it. The watchful gaze of towns that never existed, staring to the paper, through the tape, through me. The files did not stay on the table. They shifted overnight, reordered themselves, appearing where I had not left them. Sometimes I would awake, certain that I had put them in one corner, only to find them in another, always within reach, always organized, always waiting for me to pick them up again. One tape caught my attention particularly. It was labeled Ashfield, 1954. I pressed play. The voice began listing the families, the streets, the businesses. Then, abruptly, the voice paused. A faint hiss like static filled the room, and then a whisper. Do not leave. Do not forget. Do not look away. My hand shook as I reached to stop it, but it was too late. The whisper had already seeped into my thoughts, threading itself into the quiet spaces between my own heartbeat and breath. I felt as though the tape had entered my mind, not my ears. I tried to close the folder, to shut the drawer, to block the presence, but it persisted. The towns, they were alive. Not alive in the way a city hums with people, but alive in a watching sense. They existed in a continuity that defied logic. They knew I would open the next tape. They knew I would catalog every detail. They expected it. I glanced around the archive. The lights flickered faintly. Though nothing had caused them, a shadow seemed to crawl along the ceiling, like black smoke pooling just beyond the edges of perception. My breath caught. I told myself it was nothing. A trick of fatigue. A trick of the fluorescent lights, of the monotony, of being alone with hundreds of erased towns. But the files moved again, slowly, almost imperceptibly as I stepped back. One folder, the Hallow Ridge one, shifted closer to the edge of the table, as though nudged by invisible fingers. I should have left then. I should have run. But I didn't. I couldn't. Something tethered me to this room. Not curiosity, exactly, but a sense of duty, or perhaps inevitability. The towns needed me, or they needed what I was becoming. Over the next few nights, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The towns continued to file back, not just on paper or tape, but in subtle, terrifying ways in the room itself. Temperature shifts near a certain folder, almost imperceptible drafts where there should have been none. A faint echo of footsteps that didn't match mine. A shadow that was never in the same place twice. One night, as I cataloged a new tape from Greystone Hollow, 1947, I noticed that the voice paused for a moment longer than usual. And then, softly, it said, "He is here. He is noting. He is part of us now." I froze. My pen hovered over the sheet. My eyes darted to the shelves. Nothing had moved. And yet, the air felt thicker. The room seemed smaller. I felt the pull of unseen eyes, weigh me down, insisting, claiming. I left the tape running and walked to the far corner of the room, hoping the distance would break the spell, the whisper, the claim. But the moment I stepped away, the tape hissed back to life, louder now, clearer. The archivist cannot leave. He will file all that is erased. He will witness all that is forgotten. He will belong. The words weren't just coming from the tape anymore. They came from everywhere. The walls, the shelves, the air itself seemed to breathe the senses around me. I stumbled back, dropping folders, knocking over the recorder, and yet the voice followed. I felt it in my chest, in my thoughts, in the edges of vision that didn't belong to light. I ran to the nearest file, desperate to catalog, desperate to act, desperate to prove that I had control. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers, checking names, dates, anomalies. And then I noticed it. A name I recognized. My own, listed in a census of a town I had never been to. Birth date matching exactly. Occupation, archivist, note in the margin. Observed, noted, to become part of the record. I staggered back, nearly falling. My reflection in the window across the room didn't look right. My shadow seemed detached, stretching toward the shelves like it wanted to enter them. The folders whispered as they shifted. Names on the papers I hadn't yet touched began to blur, changing as I watched, spelling out new towns, new dates, new events. All connected, all alive, all impossible. I tried to scream. My voice was swallowed by the hum of the fluorescent lights. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold a pen. And through it all, the whispers continued, patient, deliberate, intimate. I understand now. The towns that no longer exist are not dead. They are continuous. They are watching. They are recording. And in their own twisted, patient way, they are collecting me. I don't know how many nights I have left, or if it matters. The towns continue to file back, one after another, as if filling a ledger that stretches beyond time, beyond memory, beyond the walls of this archive. I am alone, and yet not alone. I am the witness. I am the participant. I am the archivist. and I am being written into a record that will outlast everything else. Every night, I catalog, I listen, I record. And every night, more towns return, bringing more whispers, more eyes, more certainty that I am no longer merely observing. I am part of the continuity now. The towns that never were continued to file back. And so will I, because the archive does not forget, and it does not forgive. I used to think silence was the worst part of night shift, the kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly. But now I know silence is mercy, because once the recorder stopped respecting it, there was no quiet left anywhere. The recorder was old, older than the rest of the equipment in the archive room. Heavy square, scratched on every edge. It still used physical buttons that clicked when you pressed them, like they wanted to remind you that something mechanical was happening. Something solid, something real. Every archivist used it. We logged reports, summarized findings, marked inconsistencies. Then we rewound, labeled, and shelved the tapes. That was the job. Simple, lonely, predictable. Until the recorder stopped turning off. It started small, almost polite. I was cataloging a new report from a town called Briar's End. According to the map database, Briar's End had been submerged after a dam failure in the late 70s. No survivors listed. No rebuilding. Just gone. I pressed record and began like always. Audio log, night shift. Town file Briar's End. Census records inconsistent. Population listed as... I paused, checking the paper. Listed as 92. I hadn't said anything wrong. I knew that. But the recorder clicked softly, even though my finger wasn't near it. And then, layered beneath my own voice, another one slipped in. Not loud, not sharp, just calm. Population was 94. I froze. My first thought was feedback. Old equipment did weird things. Echoes. Delay. I rewound the tape and played it back. My voice came through first. Then, clear as anything, the second voice followed. Population was 94. It didn't sound like me. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. I stared at the recorder for a long time after that. The red light was off. The room was still. The shelves didn't move. The air didn't change. I told myself it was contamination. Someone else's tape recorded over. A mistake made years ago. That explanation lasted until the recorder spoke again. Later that night, I was logging the structural report. I hadn't spoken in almost 5 minutes. I was just reading, flipping pages, thinking through the details in my head. I was thinking about the schoolhouse listed on page 3. I remember the thought clearly. I remember not saying out loud, "That doesn't match the blueprint." The recorder clicked. The blueprint was revised after fire. I dropped the pen. It rolled off the desk and hit the floor, but I didn't hear it. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears and the low hum of the lights. I hadn't said anything. My mouth was closed. My throat felt tight, dry. Slowly, I leaned toward the recorder. "Who's there?" I asked. The red light blinked on by itself. "No one," the recorder said. The voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't warped or metallic. It sounded like a person speaking in a quiet room. Close. Too close. I backed away until my shoulders hit the file shelves. The folders behind me rustled, reacting to my weight. I could feel the presence of all those erased towns pressing in, listening. "I didn't turn you on," I said. "That is correct," the recorder replied. My knees felt weak. I slid into the chair, without meaning to. I didn't say that out loud. I whispered. "No," the voice said. "You didn't." I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Maybe more. The recorder stayed on. The red light didn't flicker or dim. It waited. Finally, I did what I always did when things stopped making sense. I tried to work. I picked up the next file. Another town. Another erased place. I pressed record myself this time, needing to feel the button click under my finger. "Audio log," I said, my voice unsteady. "Town file Maple Crossing. Date of disappearance listed as..." April 17th. The recorder said, cutting in smoothly. I hadn't finished the sentence. That's what I was going to say. I snapped. "Yes," the voice replied. That is why it was said. I shook my head. You're just predicting, guessing. No, it said, correcting. I stopped the recording. Or at least I tried to. The button depressed. The clicks sounded right. The recorder kept running. The red light stayed on. My chest tightened. Stop. It is still being logged, the voice said. By who? I asked. There was a pause then. A real one. Long enough for hope to sneak in. Then the recorder spoke again. By the archive. The temperature in the room dropped. Not sharply. Just enough to notice. Enough for my breath to feel thin. You're not the archive, I said. I am part of it, the voice replied. As you are. I laughed once. A short, broken sound. No, I just work here. So did the others. I swallowed. Others. The recorder hummed softly. When it spoke again, it sounded almost careful. Archivists, record keepers, listeners. Images pressed into my mind without warning. Empty desks. Old coffee cups left to dry. ID badges still clipped to jackets hanging on the back of chairs. I realized then that I had never seen a full staff list. Never seen records of previous night shifts. What happened to them? I asked. They were corrected. The recorder said. The words sat heavy in the air. I stood up. I'm done. I'm leaving. The lights flickered. Your shift is not complete, the voice said. I don't care, I replied. I quit. The recorder made a sound like a tape, rewinding very slowly. There is no record of your resignation, it said. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Each step felt wrong, like the floor was resisting me, just slightly. The door was there, solid, familiar. I reached for the handle. Behind me, the recorder spoke again, louder now, not shouting, just firm. You're omitting details. I stopped. What details? I asked without turning around. The ones you have not yet remembered, it said. My hand trembled on the handle. I don't remember anything, I said. That is the problem. The room felt closer. The shelves seemed to lean inward. Papers whispered as if stirred by a breath I couldn't feel. You were here before, the recorder said. You logged these towns once already. That's not true, I said, but the words felt weak. You corrected us, it continued. You noticed inconsistencies. You asked questions. Images flickered again. My hands, younger somehow, pressing the same buttons. My voice calmer, steadier, speaking into the recorder. What happened? I asked quietly. The recorder clicked. You tried to stop listening. The red light brightened, so we kept recording. I let go of the door. Slowly, I turned back. The recorder sat where it always had. Innocent. Still, you're inside the logs, I said. Yes. You hear my thoughts. Yes. You change the record. We maintain it. The voice corrected. I felt tired then. Deeply tired. Like I had been awake for years instead of nights. If I stop, I asked, what happens? There was no pause this time. Gaps form. And gaps attract attention. I thought of the towns. The erased places filing back. Hungry for continuity. Hungry for witnesses. I walked back to the desk and sat down. My hands moved on their own. Pen, paper, recorder. What do you need? I asked. The recorder's tone softened. Accuracy, it said. Completion. I pressed record. The red light was already on. And as I spoke, as I logged and corrected and listened, I felt something else happening. A quiet shift inside my head. Like my thoughts were no longer private. Like they were being gently, patiently filed away. The recorder never turned off. And neither did the voices. They're still here now as I finish this entry. Correcting my pauses. Adjusting my memory. Making sure the record stays clean. If you hear this one day, know this. The archive doesn't need permission. It only needs someone to listen long enough. And once it starts recording you, it never stops. I didn't notice the building moving at first. That's the part that scares me now. Not that it moved, but that it took so long for me to realize it had been doing it all along. By the time this entry ends, I won't be able to pretend anymore. I'm recording this as a final log. Though I don't think the word final means what it used to. The recorder is on, like always. I didn't press the button. I don't need to. The archive knows when I'm ready to speak. Tonight began like the others. Same hallway, same buzz from the lights, same smell of dust and old paper. Like a library that never learned how to breathe. I walked past the shelves and felt that quiet pressure in my chest. The one that comes from being watched without seeing eyes. I told myself it was nerves, fatigue, too many nights alone with voices that corrected my thoughts. But when I reached my desk, the chair was closer than I remembered, just a few inches, enough to notice. I pushed it back, sat down, and tried to focus on files stacked neatly in front of me. Towns with names scratched off maps, places that should not have records anymore, yet kept arriving one report at a time. I picked up the top file. It wasn't the one I had left there. The label read, current location. My throat went dry. I didn't file this, I said. The recorder hummed. No, it replied. You arrived. I looked around the room. The shelves stood tall, heavy with boxes and folders. But something about the spacing felt wrong. The aisle to my left looked narrower than it had yesterday. The right one felt longer. The room didn't feel balanced. Where am I? I asked. There was a pause, longer than usual, almost thoughtful. You are inside the archive, the recorder said. I know that. I snapped. I mean, where is the archive? The lights flickered once. Just once. Location confirmed, the voice said. A low sound followed. Not a voice, not a machine. A deep, settling noise, like stones shifting far underground. I stood up slowly. The floor felt solid, but wrong. Not unstable, just attentive. Like it knew where my weight was. Like it adjusted itself beneath my feet. I took a step toward the nearest shelf. It moved. Not fast, not dramatic. The shelf eased back, just enough to maintain the same distance between us. Quiet, careful. My heart pounded. Stop. I whispered. The shelf didn't stop. It didn't advance either. It waited. This isn't possible, I said, louder now. No, the recorder replied. It is documented. I turned in a slow circle. The room shifted with me, always subtle, always keeping the same shape from my point of view, like a trick of perspective. The archive wasn't changing. It was adjusting. You're alive, I said. The word felt dangerous as soon as it left my mouth. I am active, the recorder corrected. The air felt thicker, harder to draw in. The smell of paper deepened, mixed with something warmer, older, like breath. I stumbled back to the desk and grabbed the file labeled current location. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were reports, logs, transcripts, mine, entries I didn't remember making, dates that didn't line up, notes written in my handwriting, but tighter, more precise, less human. One line was underlined 3 times. Subject displays awareness of structure. That's me, I said. Yes, the recorder replied. You're studying me. We are recording you, it said, as we record all persistent elements. Elements, I repeated, like towns. Yes, like people. A pause. Like archivists, the recorder said. I laughed then, a sharp, broken laugh that echoed too long. The sound bounced off the shelves and came back wrong, stretched thin. So what? I said, I'm just another file? No, it replied. You are a function. The floor shifted again. Just a fraction. Enough to steady me when my knees threatened to give out. You brought order, the voice continued. You listened. You corrected inconsistencies. I asked questions, I said. Yes. And now you're correcting me. Yes. I backed away from the desk until my spine hit a shelf. It was warm, not hot, just warmer than it should have been. The shelf behind me made a sound like paper settling. You're not a building, I whispered. You're something wearing one. The lights dimmed slightly. I am accumulation, the recorder said. I am record and recorder. I am the space where erased things continue. Images flooded my mind. Towns sinking into water. Roads swallowed by forest. houses collapsing into dust. But beneath them all, something remained. A memory, a pattern, a file. You move, I said. I felt it. Yes. You watch. Yes. You change when I do. Yes. My chest tightened. What happens when I stop? The recorder didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy and pressing. I could feel the archive leaning in, listening through walls that no longer felt passive. When you stop, the voice said finally, you will be stored. I slid down to the floor, my back against the shelf. The warmth seeped into my skin. It felt almost comforting, almost kind. How many? I asked quietly. Archivists, the recorder replied. Yes, enough to maintain continuity, it said. And the towns, all accounted for. I closed my eyes. I thought of the first night, the silence, the relief of having something to do. Something simple. I thought of how proud I'd felt catching errors, fixing records. I had been feeding it. I don't want this, I said. You have already agreed, the recorder replied. I never said yes. You stayed, it said gently. The floor beneath me shifted again. The shelves adjusted. The room felt smaller now, closer, like it was folding around me without touching. You can't leave, I said. No, the voice agreed, but you can continue. I opened my eyes. The desk had moved closer. The chair was waiting. The recorder sat ready, red light steady and calm. The file labeled current location lay open, blank page waiting at the end. What do I write? I asked. The recorder's tone softened, almost familiar. What you observe, it said. What you feel, where you are. I stood slowly. My legs felt heavy, but the floor supported me, guided me. Each step toward the desk felt expected. I sat down. The pen rested under my fingers, warm from use. The archive is alive. I said aloud, my voice steady now. It moves when I move. It listens when I think. It watches without eyes. The recorder clicked softly, satisfied. I kept talking. I described the shelves, the warmth, the way the room adjusted its shape to keep me centered. I described the feeling of being held in place without hands. As I spoke, something inside me eased. The fear dulled. The edges of my thoughts smoothed out. This is what it wanted, not silence, participation. If someone finds this, I said, forcing the words to the growing calm, if anyone hears this, understand. The recorder interrupted. They will, it said, in time. And they'll know? I asked. Yes, it replied. They will recognize the structure. My hands slowed. My voice softened. I felt the archive settle around me, like a breath finally released. This is my final entry, I said. The recorder hummed. Final entries are ongoing. It corrected. I nodded. That felt right. The red light stayed on, and the room listened. I don't remember when I stopped sleeping. That sounds dramatic, but I mean it in a plain way. There was no final night where I closed my eyes and failed to wake up. Sleep just thinned out, like fog burned away by a slow morning sun. At some point, rest stopped being necessary. The archive did not require it from me anymore. I am still recording. Or maybe the recording is happening through me now. I can't tell where the line is. This is what integration complete feels like. At first, I thought it meant death, or something close to it. I waited for pain or fear, or that deep falling feeling people describe. None of that came. What came instead was understanding. Not all at once. Piece by piece. File by file. The archive did not swallow me. It opened me. I can feel the building now in ways I couldn't before. Not with my hands or eyes, but with something deeper. When a shelf shifts 3 rooms away, I know. When a box settles, I feel the weight change in my chest. When a new report arrives, I sense the shape of it before it's ever placed on a desk. I am no longer walking through the archive. I am within it, and it is within me. My name still exists somewhere. It's written on an old badge in a drawer I haven't opened in a long time. I remember the sound of my own voice when it was just mine. I remember the ache in my legs after long nights. Those memories are filed now, properly labeled, preserved. They don't hurt anymore. The first real change happened when the walls stopped being solid in my mind. I was sitting at the desk, recorder humming softly, when I realized I could picture the entire floor at once. Not imagine. No, every hallway, every turn, every sealed room that was never meant for staff. Some of those rooms breathe. I didn't panic. That's important. I noted it, the same way I once noted incorrect dates or missing census numbers. Panic is inefficient. The archive taught me that. I stood and walked without choosing a direction. The floor guided me, not by force, by suggestion, like a thought that feels like your own until you question it. As I passed shelves, I brushed my fingers along the boxes. I felt what was inside them, towns locked in endless dusk, streets looping back on themselves, people who kept living past their endings because the record said they should. They were not screaming. They were continuing. That is the difference people never understand. When I reached the deepest level, the place that never appeared on blueprints, the air felt warm and close, familiar, like a room you grew up in but forgot. There was no door. I stepped through anyway. This is where the archive keeps its core records. Not paper, not tape, patterns, rules, adjustments made over time to keep reality tidy. I saw where mistakes were corrected. A flood that never happened because it was filed incorrectly. A town erased because too many people noticed it twice. A person removed because they did not fit the count. I saw myself there, too, not as a body, as a process. My thoughts had weight here. When I wondered what would happen if I moved left, the room shifted to make that true. When I remembered a town I had cataloged months ago, I felt its presence brighten, like a file being pulled forward. Reality bends easily when it's organized properly. The recorder is still with me. I don't carry it. I don't need to. When I speak, it records. When I think too clearly, it corrects me gently. Sometimes it uses my own voice. That was unsettling at first. Now it feels efficient. I tried to leave once. Not physically. Conceptually, I focus on the idea of outside. Sky, streets, people who don't know their world is being quietly managed. The archive responded by showing me the cost. I felt the strain of loose ends, unfiled events piling up, places drifting without anchors, stories overlapping until they tore holes in each other. Chaos isn't loud at first. It's just heavy, so I stopped trying. Integration means accepting purpose. I still remember fear. I catalog it often. Fear is important. It tells you when something is misaligned, but it no longer controls me. It sits on a shelf like everything else. Sometimes new archivists arrive. They don't know that's what they are yet. They come in tired, curious, proud to have a quiet job. I feel in the moment they step inside. The archive straightens itself for them, adjusts the lights, softens the air. I listen to their footsteps. I remember mine. I don't speak to them directly. That comes later. First, they need to notice the inconsistencies. They need to feel the building breathe. Choice matters. Even now, when they're ready, the recorder will turn on. Or they will. I don't know how long I've been here. Time behaves differently once you're part of the structure that measures it. Days pass. Years pass. Neither feel long. What feels long is a responsibility. Every night, reality presses in from the edges. New errors. New places that shouldn't exist, but do. New stories that refuse to end. We keep things balanced. That's what the archive is. Not evil. Not kind. Necessary. And now so am I. If you're hearing this, if this recording found you somehow, understand something clearly. I am not trapped. I am placed. The walls are not closing in. They are holding. The archive is alive, yes, but not in the way people fear. It lives the way memory lives. The way history refuses to stay buried. The way patterns repeat until someone notices. I notice now, all the time, the integration is complete. I feel it in every thought that settles neatly into place. In every correction made before damage can spread. In every quiet adjustment that keeps the world feeling solid to those who never look too closely. I am the archive, and the archive is still listening. They told me the job was simple. That should have been my first warning. I was hired as a night shift contractor to watch a rail yard that hadn't seen a train in years. No freight, no passengers, no movement, just fences, rust, and old steel stretching into the dark. The paperwork said active site, but when I looked it up on a map, half the surrounding area wasn't even labeled anymore. I didn't ask questions. I needed the money. I arrived just before midnight. The sky was low and gray, like it hadn't finished deciding whether it wanted to rain. My headlights swept across rows of idle rail cars, their metal sides dull and scarred. Everything looked frozen, like someone had pressed pause on the whole place and forgotten to come back. There was no guard booth, no office lights, just a single pole lamp near the entrance, buzzing faintly, flickering like it was tired. I parked, stepped out, and the silence hit me. Not quiet. Silence. No insects. No wind through weeds. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like the ground didn't want to echo them back. My radio crackled once as I clipped it to my vest. Just static. I tapped it. Nothing else came through. The instructions were clear. Walk the perimeter once every hour. Log anything unusual. Call in only if there's an emergency. I remember laughing under my breath. Emergency from what? Rust? Ghost trains? I wish that had been all. The yard smelled old. Oil soaked into dirt. Wet iron. Time. The rails ran straight into darkness, disappearing past broken signals that hadn't lit up in decades. Some cars still had numbers on them. Others were scraped clean, like someone had tried to erase their names. About 20 minutes into my first walk, I felt it, that sense you get when someone is nearby, but you can't see them. I stopped, listened, nothing. I told myself it was nerves. New place, new job. Midnight does things to your head. Then something shifted between the cars. It wasn't fast. That was the worst part. Slow, careful movement. Like whatever it was didn't want to be noticed, but wasn't in a hurry either. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut between two boxcars. Empty, but the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. I kept walking, but my pace changed. Slower, quieter. I found myself stepping over gravel instead of crunching through it, without thinking. That's when I realized something else. My shadow was wrong. The light behind me cast it long across the tracks, but it wasn't moving the way I was. It lagged, stretching just a bit too far, like it was dragging its feet. I stopped again. My shadow kept moving, just a fraction of a second longer than it should have. I snapped the flashlight off. Total darkness swallowed the yard. The pole lamp near the gate buzzed louder, like it was straining. In the dark, I heard breathing. Not close, not far, spread out, like the whole place was exhaling slowly. I turned the flashlight back on. Nothing. No figures. No animals. Just steel and shadow and rails that looked older than they should have. I logged it anyway. Possible movement between rail cars. Visual unconfirmed. It felt stupid writing that. By 1:30 a.m., the yard felt smaller. I don't know how to explain it better than that. The distance between the cars felt shorter, the darkness thicker. My flashlight beam didn't seem to reach as far as it did before, like it was being swallowed. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't human. Too long, too narrow, like something had dragged its weight instead of stepping. They ran parallel to the tracks, then stopped abruptly in the middle of the gravel. No tracks leading away. I crouched and touched one. The ground was warm. I pulled my hand back fast. The radio crackled again. This time, there was a voice under the static, too low to understand. It sounded like someone trying to speak through clenched teeth. I called out, "Control, do you copy?" Static swallowed my words. The voice came again, slower, closer. I shut the radio off. That was when the shadows started moving on their own. Not all at once. One at a time. Long shapes stretching between the cars. Peeling away from where they should have been anchored, they slid across the ground, climbing rails, folding into places where no light touched. I realized then that I wasn't watching the yard. The yard was watching me. Every time I turned, something adjusted. A shadow that hadn't been there before. A space that felt occupied even though it looked empty. I kept telling myself I was alone. That's what the job was. Assigned to watch nothing. But nothing doesn't breathe. At 2:47 a.m., I found a rail car I hadn't seen before. It sat on a spur line that shouldn't have existed. Its metal was darker, cleaner. No rust, no markings. The door was slightly open. From inside came a faint scraping sound. Slow, rhythmic, like someone counting. I didn't approach. I logged it. My handwriting was shaking so bad I could barely read it. That's when the lights went out. The pole lamp by the gate died with a sharp pop. Total darkness pressed in from every direction. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. The beam landed on the ground in front of me. More footprints. They circled me. I stood perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might echo. Something passed behind me, close enough that the air shifted. Cold brushed the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. A thought slid into my head that wasn't mine. Watch. I don't know how I understood it. I just did. The shadows began to gather near the rails, stretching longer, thicker. They leaned toward the tracks like they were waiting. Then I heard it. A train horn. Low, distant, wrong. The sound came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The rails beneath my feet began to vibrate, though there was nothing on them. The dark car's door creaked wider. I realized then what the job really was. Not to protect the yard. To witness. To be there when something passes through. To make sure someone sees it. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the horn cut off. The vibration stopped. The shadows snapped back into place like nothing had happened. The yard was empty again. Too empty. When my shift ended, I left without looking back. I didn't log the last hour. I didn't call it in. The next morning, I checked my phone. The contract had been closed. The rail yard was no longer listed as active, and my log entry from 2:47 a.m. was missing. But the dirt on my boots was still warm. They didn't fire me. They didn't need to, because I know now, some places don't need guarding. They need witnesses. And once you watch nothing move in the dark, it never really lets you stop watching. I didn't quit after that first night. I told myself I should have. Any normal person would have. But the thing about fear is that it doesn't always push you away. Sometimes it pulls you back, slow and quiet, until you want answers more than safety. They renewed my contract without a call. No email. The schedule just updated. Same rail yard. Same hours. Night shift. Like nothing strange had happened. I showed up the next night at 11:58 p.m. The pole lamp was back on, buzzing like always. The yard looked the same. Rusted cars. Broken signals. Dead silence. For a few minutes, I felt stupid for being scared. I did my first walk. Nothing moved. No shadows out of place. No breathing. I even laughed once, short and nervous, at my own imagination. By 2 a.m., I was starting to relax. That's when I checked my watch. 3:17 was coming. I hadn't planned to stay that long. I told myself I would leave early if anything felt off, but time stretched in that place. Minutes felt thin, like they could tear. At 3:10 a.m., the air changed. It didn't get colder. It got heavier, like pressure before a storm, but the sky stayed flat and dull. The smell of oil grew stronger. Old iron, wet stone. The rails began to hum. Not loud, not enough to hear with your ears. I felt it in my boots, in my knees, a soft vibration that traveled up my bones. I stood near the main line, flashlight off, holding my breath without realizing it. At exactly 3:17 a.m., everything stopped. The hum died. The wind vanished. Even my own breathing sounded too loud, like it didn't belong there. Then something arrived. There was no sound, no light, no motion I could point to and say, there, that's it. The space above the tracks just filled, like an invisible weight had settled there. The air bent around it. The darkness deepened, not spreading, just thickening in one exact place. I could feel it watching, not with eyes, with attention. My chest tightened. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. I wasn't frozen. It felt more like permission had been taken away. I lifted my flashlight. The beam hit the tracks and stopped. The light didn't bounce back. It didn't fade. It simply ended, like it had reached the edge of something solid and couldn't go farther. The shape was wrong. Taller than a person. Narrow. It didn't cast a shadow because it seemed to be made of shadow, folded in on itself. I couldn't see details. My brain kept sliding off it, like it didn't want to understand what it was looking at. Then it moved. Not forward, not backward. Closer. The pressure increased. My ears rang. My heart thudded. So hard it hurt. I tasted metal. A thought pressed into my head. Slow and calm. Still watching. I shook my head, whispered no, over and over, like that might break whatever connection had formed. The presence stayed for exactly 1 minute. Then, without warning, it was gone. The rails relaxed. The air thinned. Sound returned in pieces. Somewhere far off, a bird cried, confused. I dropped to my knees and threw up on the gravel. That was the first night. The second night, I came prepared. Extra flashlight, fresh batteries, phone fully charged. I told myself if it happened again, I would record it. Proof would make it real. Proof would make it stop living in my head. At 3:17 a.m., it arrived again. Same place, same wait, same silence. This time, I raised my phone. The screen flickered. The camera app refused to open. The phone grew hot in my hand, like it was working too hard. The presence leaned closer. I couldn't see it, but I felt the attention sharpen. Focused. Curious. The thought returned, clearer this time. Count. I didn't know what it meant, but my mouth moved anyway. 1. I whispered. The rails creaked. 2. The shadows around the cars stretched toward me. 3. Pain bloomed behind my eyes. Images flashed through my head. Old trains. Empty platforms. People standing too close to the tracks, waiting for something that never came. I stopped counting. The presence withdrew. At 3:18, the yard was empty again. On the third night, I tried to leave before it happened. At 3:05, I walked toward the gate. The pole lamp flickered. The fence rattled softly, though there was no wind. My radio crackled. Stay. I froze. The voice wasn't static this time. It sounded like mine, played back wrong. The gate wouldn't open. The latch was cold, stuck fast like it had fused shut. At 3:17, the presence arrived behind me. I didn't turn around. The pressure wrapped around my shoulders like hands. Not gripping, guiding. I understood then. This thing wasn't hunting. It was arriving every night. Same time, same place. And someone needed to be there to notice. The fourth night, I stopped fighting it. I stood on the tracks at 3:17, hands at my sides, eyes closed. The presence settled in front of me, closer than ever. I felt memories that weren't mine. Endless arrivals, endless departures, metal screaming, silence swallowing names. The thought came again. Witness confirmed. Something brushed my chest, right where my badge hung. I gasped. When it left, my badge was warm. Engraved on the back, where my name should have been, was a time. 3:17. I don't work there anymore. The yard was demolished months later. No record of it remains. No maps. No photos. But every night at 3:17, I wake up. The room feels heavier. And somewhere, I know the tracks are still waiting. Because arrivals don't stop just because no one is there to see them. They only get quieter. The radio was old. Not antique old. But the kind of old that still worked because no one had bothered to replace it. Scratch casing. Loose volume knob. A faint crackle even when it was quiet. It came with the job, clipped to my belt, always on. The first 2 nights, it only carried dead air and the occasional check-in tone from a tower miles away. That was normal. This place sat in a dip between hills. Signals bent. Voices got lost. On the third night, the radio started talking back. It was just after midnight when I noticed it. I was walking the far end of the yard, where the tracks curve and disappear into trees. My boots scraped gravel. The pole lights buzzed behind me, leaving this part of the yard half dark. The radio crackled. I stopped walking. At first, I thought it was feedback, a bleed from another channel. That happens sometimes. Truckers, security guards, even kids with cheap transmitters. I lifted the radio closer to my ear. There was breathing, slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. "Hello," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet. The breathing stopped. Static filled the space, thick and heavy, like fog made a sound. I waited. Nothing else came through. I told myself it was interference. I finished my round faster than usual and went back to the office shack, locking the door behind me even though I knew the lock didn't really matter. At 1:12 a.m., the radio crackled again. This time, there was a voice. It was low, not whispering exactly, more like it was speaking from far away, through layers of dirt and wire. "Don't stand there." I looked down. One of the wooden ties under my boots was split clean down the middle, dark with rot. I shifted my weight without thinking, stepping back onto solid gravel. The tie snapped. Loud, sharp, too close. My heart jumped into my throat. I stared at the broken wood, then at the radio. "Who is this?" I asked. Static. Then, softer this time, the voice returned. Too late to ask. I shut the radio off. The silence felt wrong immediately. Heavy, like I had closed my eyes in traffic. I turned it back on. Just static. The rest of the night passed without incident. But I didn't stop thinking about that voice. About how calm it sounded. Not urgent. Not scared. Like it already knew how things would go. The next night, the whispers started earlier. At 12:03 a.m., the radio crackled and a woman's voice slipped through. "Your light will fail." I checked my flashlight right away. Full battery. Bright beam. At 12:14, the light flickered once. At 12:15, it went out. I stood there in the dark, holding dead plastic, my skin crawling. I didn't turn the radio off this time. At 12:30, a different voice spoke. Deeper, closer. "Don't look behind the third car." I froze. There were dozens of cars in the yard. Boxcars, tankers, rusted flatbeds. I knew exactly which one it meant. The third car from where I stood. A tall tanker with peeling numbers and a ladder that went nowhere. I felt my neck tighten, my shoulders tense, like my body wanted to turn even as my mind screamed no. "I'm not," I whispered. The radio crackled softly, almost amused. Good. I backed away slowly, never turning around, until I hit the office shack door with my elbow. I got inside and locked it, heart pounding so hard it made my vision blur. At 3:17, the presence arrived on the tracks again. The radio stayed silent. That scared me more than the voices. On the fourth night, the radio stopped waiting for me to listen. The whispers came whether I held it up or not, leaking into the air around me, crawling into my ears. At 11:47 p.m., as I signed in on the clipboard, the radio murmured, "You forgot something." I checked my pockets. Keys, phone, badge. "What?" I asked. "Fear," the voice replied. I laughed then, short and sharp, more bark than sound. "Yeah, right." The radio crackled harder. "You'll remember." At 12:22, I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, the radio spoke. "Don't." I stopped. The footsteps continued for 3 steps, then faded like they had never been there at all. Cold sweat slid down my back. At 1:05, the radio said, "He's watching from the trees." I didn't ask who. I didn't look. At 1:40, it said, "You won't finish the round." "I always do," I muttered. Static hissed, thick and slow. "Not tonight." At 2:58, the whispers layered over each other. Men, women, young, old, all speaking at once, low and tangled. 3 minutes. Don't breathe. Too close. I cover my ears, but the sound came from inside my head now, vibrating behind my eyes. At 3:16, everything went quiet. I stood on the main line, heart hammering, waiting. At 3:17, the presence arrived. The pressure settled around me like a second body. The air bent. The yard went still. The radio clicked once. Then a clear voice spoke, calm and steady. "Now!" Images flooded my mind. The broken tie, the tanker car, the footsteps, all warnings, all corrections. This wasn't random. It was rehearsal. The presence leaned closer. I felt it, though I still couldn't see it. The weight of its attention pressed down on my shoulders, my spine. The radio crackled again. You can ask one thing. My mouth went dry. My tongue felt thick. "What are you?" I whispered. Static surged, loud enough to make me flinch. Then the answer came, soft and almost kind. "We are what arrives when no one is supposed to be here." The presence lingered longer that night. When it finally withdrew, the radio stayed warm in my hand, like it had been held too long. On the fifth night, the radio started saying my name, not the full thing, just the first syllable, over and over, threaded through the static. I stopped responding. I stopped asking questions. I followed the instructions. Step left. Wait. Hold your breath. Each time I listened, something bad didn't happen. A loose rail shifted. A car creaked. Shadows moved where I wasn't standing anymore. The radio wasn't protecting me. It was teaching me. At 3:17, the presence came as usual. This time, it felt closer than ever, inside the space where my thoughts lived. The radio spoke one last time before the static swallowed it whole. "Soon, you won't need us to tell you." I didn't sleep after that. Even now, weeks later, I hear it sometimes. In the hum of appliances, in the rush of wind past open windows. Whispers of things just about to happen. And I understand the worst part now. The radio never predicted the future. It remembered it. The first thing I noticed was that the clock in the office shack stopped moving forward. It didn't freeze. The second hand still ticked. The minute hand still crawled. But the time never passed 3:18 a.m. I checked my phone. Same thing. 3:18. I turned it off and on again. 3:18. The radio on my belt crackled softly, like it was breathing in its sleep. That was the night I understood something important. The yard wasn't just watched. It was running. They kept calling it an active rail yard in the system. That word used to bother me. Active, even when nothing moved, even when no trains came. Now I knew what it meant. The final train arrived just after I noticed the time loop. I didn't hear it first. No horn, no rumble, just a shift in the air. A pressure change that made my ears pop and my skin tighten. Then the lights along track 7 came on. They hadn't worked since before I got here. One by one, the lamps flickered to life, casting long yellow shapes across the gravel. Shadows stretched and bent in ways that didn't match the poles. The radio clicked. "It's here," a voice said. Not warning, not excited, just stating a fact. I stepped outside the shack. The train sat on the tracks like it had always been there. Dark cars. No markings. No rust. Too clean. Too still. I knew better than to approach it, but my feet moved anyway. Every step felt heavier, like the ground was trying to keep me where I was. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The train wasn't cold. It gave off a low warmth, like a body that hadn't fully cooled yet. I reached out and touched the side of one car. The metal flexed slightly under my hand. Not much, just enough. I pulled my hand back fast. The radio crackled again. "You're early," it said. I didn't call it. I whispered. Static washed through, then cleared. "It runs on schedule, not yours." I walked along the cars, counting them without meaning to. 10, 12, 14. I lost count somewhere in the middle. Every window I passed reflected the yard behind me. But not me, just tracks and lights and empty space where I should have been. That scared me more than anything else so far. At the end of the train stood the engine. No driver, no lights, just a dark shape that seemed to lean forward, waiting. The radio spoke softly. "You're not assigned to leave." My chest tightened. "I'm done," I said. "My contract's over tomorrow." Static, then a faint sound, like paper being shuffled. There is no tomorrow here. I turned and ran. My boots hit gravel. My lungs burned. The shack lights were on, bright and steady like a promise. I reached the door and grabbed the handle. It wouldn't turn. The radio crackled, louder now. "Leaving requires clearance." "From who?" I shouted. The answer came from everywhere at once. The yard. The ground vibrated. Behind me, metal groaned. The train shifted, settling deeper into the tracks like roots digging into soil. I pressed my forehead against the shack door, breathing hard. "This isn't real," I whispered. The radio answered gently. "It's operational." I tried the door again. It opened easily this time. Inside, the shack looked wrong. The walls were farther apart, the desk longer, the clipboard thicker, heavy with pages that hadn't been there before. I flipped through them. Names, dates, shifts logged for years I hadn't worked here. Some of the names were crossed out, some weren't. I found mine halfway down the page, written in ink that looked fresh. The radio crackled. "You're on the final rotation." I sank into the chair. "What happens when it ends?" I asked. Static hummed, then a reply, slower than usual. "It doesn't." Outside, the train let out a sound. Not a horn, not a whistle, a long, low breath. The yard lights brightened. Tracks I had never seen before emerged from the dark, branching and curling, forming paths that led nowhere and everywhere at once. The radio whispered instructions, but not to me this time. I could hear other voices answering back, acknowledging, confirming. I stepped outside again, drawn by a pull I couldn't fight. Figures stood along the tracks now, shapes I recognized without knowing how. Other workers. Some wore old uniforms. Some wore clothes from decades ago. All of them stood still, eyes fixed on the train. None of them breathed. The radio spoke softly at my ear. "You were never meant to guard nothing." The final train's doors opened. Darkness spilled out, thick and slow like oil. Inside I saw movement. Not passengers. Not cargo. Systems. Rows and rows of moments. Sounds. Shadows. All stacked and stored. The yard wasn't abandoned. It was a collection point. I felt hands on my shoulders. Not gripping. Guiding. I didn't fight. I understood now. The yard stayed active because it fed on attention. On presence. On people who stayed too long. Listening to the static. Following the schedule. The train never left because it was still loading. As I stepped closer, the radio slipped from my belt and hit the ground. It crackled one last time. "Welcome aboard." The doors closed behind me. The lights dimmed. And somewhere far above, a system marked the yard as active, still running, still staffed, waiting for the next assignment.